We're going to get fired up. We've still got a lot to get done here before the festivities a little later this evening. So we're going to spend the next little bit talking about the thing that at the end of the day pays all of our bills. Sometimes we spend a lot of time talking about some long-term efforts, things that we put in place, and sometimes we don't reap the harvest of those things for a long time. Or sometimes, as over the last hour or so, we heard a pretty impressive, well-rounded civil philosophical conversations on some other issues. Now we're going to try to make it real. And hopefully you listen. What I would really encourage you over the next little bit, the next three speakers, I'm going to challenge you not listen to these speakers on behalf of yourself. I don't know if you've looked at the mission statement of Simmental lately, but if you haven't, you need to refresh your memory what the mission statement is of this organization. Our organization is to have impact in the commercial sector. If we do that, you're successful. If we don't, it ain't gonna work well for any of us. So I would challenge you to listen to the next few folks through the prism of your bull buyer. What are they thinking? What are they learning? What are the challenges that commercial family is facing? What's the different challenge between somebody who's seasoned and been in the business a long time and they're trying to think, okay, over the next 10 years, I'm transitioning this business to that next generation. How am I going to get tools for them so that they can be successful? Because clearly, Russ, some of us are going to have to do things differently than maybe Grandpa did. So with that, that's my challenge to you. So our first speaker, we're all prone, Dr. Jones, to want to get too wound up in math and figures, and by golly, there's not a mathematical equation that Wade's never liked, okay? So we could do all that. But sometimes we have to remind ourselves how this industry really works. And I think a great voice to help us start that very pragmatically is a gentleman who comes to us from a pretty formative role and a pretty significant role within Superior Livestock Auctions. If you're not familiar with that firm, and I bet that you are, they are by some margin the largest marketer of feeder cattle. They are what we call an influencer. And Charly Cummings comes to us, well, he would say he comes from Southeast Kansas, but that's almost not exactly true because he went to a ridiculous level of effort to get here from an event in Sheridan, Wyoming yesterday. I'll tell a little story. I got an email way late at night last night that said, we got a problem. And then I got another email shortly thereafter that said, yep, we damn certainly got a problem. And somehow, even though I didn't think Charly was going to be able to get here because I thought all the forces were going to be against this, he pulled it off to my surprise. Charly Cummings is going to talk to us a little bit about the pragmatic, especially initial steps to taking that forward look to what we're all doing. Charly, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chip. Well, I'm going to begin in a couple different stages. Last night at 4:30, beginning to fly out of Sheridan, Wyoming, and the storms roll in. At 11 o'clock, I got out of there and end up in Wichita last night at 12:30. Denver at 12:30. And the first flight out of Denver is at 8. It's at full. The next one's at 11, and it's full, so I can get out at 1:30. So that's where the conversation with Chip and I began. I went down early this morning right at 4:45, got on the 8 o'clock flight, start boarding at 7:35. They stopped the boarding process, said we're going to have to delay it 20 minutes. There's a tire problem with the airplane. Thought, here we go. You gotta love to travel. Gotta love to travel. Anyway, we got off. We was able to make it, and glad to be here. Say thank you on behalf of everybody with Superior Livestock, including myself. I'm not going to talk to you a lot about Superior Livestock. I'm not going to get a big sales pitch about Superior Livestock and what they are. They can do that with themselves and amongst yourselves. I'm kind of going to talk to you a little bit from an auctioneer standpoint. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we can do to and for the commercial cattlemen. Before we do that, and before I get into that, this is my first opportunity to be able to public speak. So you say, yeah, right, you're an auctioneer. Well, let me tell you something. You put me behind that right there, and you put my microphone in there, and you put a catalog in front of me, and you run 250 bulls in front of me, and I'm pretty comfortable, and I'm not going to run out of much to say. But when you turn me around like this and I look up there, I'm asking for something to come from up there to come to me so I can say it to you. I'm not looking at the slide. So just so you know, when I start mumbling and jumbling and trying to get through this, it's just me. So, but the main reason I want to become a speaker before I go on to what I'm thinking about, my wife has suffered from anxiety. We have 700 mama cows, and we're both real estate agents. I work for Superior Livestock full time. My brother farms 3,000 acres. We got enough to do, and I pile all this on my wife. Okay, and she's a school teacher as well, and she begins to battle a battle called anxiety. I've always been taught, my mom and dad always taught me, get up and get out of bed, let's go. And so that's how I always was. Well, for almost a year and a half, that's how I was with my wife. And I want to become an advocate. It's a disease. And we in the ranching business, we in what we do week in and week out, we see things like hit last week. We see things like this mud we fought last winter. It's pretty easy for us to hit it. I want to be able to speak, and this is the beginning process. You're part of it. I want to be able to speak to farmers and ranchers and let you know my experience so we don't have to fight through it. Because it's not something that you can just take a white pill and get over. You got to really get down deep and get mental and get through it. So that's what I want to be able to do eventually. So this is a great opportunity for me to be able to speak. So when I thought about when I was asked to speak, it took me how long to get you a picture and a bio? Yeah, I put it off forever. Jackie finally got me talked into it, and I thought, well, what am I going to speak about? What will I talk about? And I want to talk about focus on the commercial cattleman. Focus is a great word. Fall focus. I just asked Jackie 6 years ago, you come up with this great idea to get together, to get focused. Get focused right here, early fall, getting ready, get focused on what we're going to do. How are we going to help the commercial cattlemen in their operations to be successful? So that's kind of what I'm going to talk to you about from my perspective at the auction block. So, Zig Ziglar said, when you focus on the problems, you get more problems. When you focus on the possibilities, you get more opportunities. Anybody ever heard of Zig Ziglar? He's awesome, isn't he? That's not how he would have said it. He said, when you focus on the possibilities, you get more opportunities. So it's pretty easy for me in my operation as I stand back behind the alley at a sale barn for nearly 15 years and sort cattle. What's the guy do that sorts cattle into the ring? He's got to sex them. He's got to size them. He's got to find the bad eye. He's got to find the crooked head. He's got to find everything that's wrong with those cattle. He's got to find the problems. So when I go out to my operation and look at my operation, it's pretty easy for me to find the problems. I look out of that red balancer heifer standing out there, and she weighs 1,200. She's 7 years old. For the last 6 years, stinking old girl, she's weaned a 475-pound calf. She is a problem. Or is she not? She might be an opportunity. She's got great possibilities. She's bred back every year. She's done everything right for me in my program other than she's had a small calf. But she don't eat near as much either because she's not near as big. So if I take her and I focus on the possibilities of putting her back into my program, she becomes an opportunity. So let's continue to think about the problems. We look at the problems 2 weeks ago. Who would have thought a stinking fire in the middle of a plant would do what it did on Monday and do it again on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday they turn it around and drive it back the other way? Yeah, it's a problem, all right. Scott and I were just talking. I'm going to buy a packing plant. Somebody give me $400 million, I'll show you how to run it. Make $500 a head. It's pretty easy. But, you know, we got to be advocates, we got to speak out, we got to do our part in that of it. But I think there's opportunities at different times that's going to give there's possibilities for great opportunities. And instead of just focusing on the problems continually, let's focus on the opportunities. When do you focus? When do you focus? You focus the very first part of November, start focusing through that catalog. What am I going to AI with? What am I going to put in? What am I going to do? What am I going to focus with? What am I looking for next year? How many embryos are we going to put in? When do you focus? When do you really think about focus? Well, I'll tell you when I think about focus, and I think about my grandma. That's not her, but That's a cute little lady. I found her on Google. I was 17 years old, and I had to take my grandma to the eye doctor. She had to get her eyes dilated and get a new pair of glasses. Dropped her off. I was 17, 18 years old. She said it'd be about 25 minutes, so I went and run some errands down by the city pool. And anyway, come back. My grandma comes walking out of the eye doctor. And she is walking like, you can't imagine. She's 78 years old. I'm wondering all along, she's 78 years old. Why is she even driving? Well, my dad's 75, and he's taking hay to Hiawatha this afternoon. So why was I worried about her when I was 17? She's fine. She comes out. She's got the real pretty, tell you how old you are. You remember the real pretty glasses that had black frames all the way around them? They're real narrow, and then they put the great big gloop of focus in the bottom of it where you could look down and see and read. Yeah, that's what she had. So she comes walking over to the door. About the third time, I started to laugh. And she stepped back, she looked at herself in the reflection, and she put her glasses down on her nose, just like that little lady. And she said, when she opened the door, she said, "Whoo, they got me focused." And I said, "Yeah, I could tell you really get a hold of the door handle." She said, "Well, I have to get used to the bottom side of it." So you think about that customer of yours, ours, theirs, comes into our production sale, spends $5,000, $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 on a bull. You know how they look when they leave after they write the check? They can't wait for you to deliver that bull. They are focused. When they get to the car door, say that's almost time for market. What happens? Are they still focused? They still got all the programs they need? Do they have everything they want? Do they have everything that the buyer wants? Do we have everything in order for them to reap the best that they can reap out of those cattle for dollars per hundred that day? Nah, you know what usually happens? I've seen it, I heard it, I felt it. They spend $8,000, they call you, you deliver the bull, you lean over the hood, you have a great conversation, great sale, thank you. Turns the bull out, he sees you at the county fair, super excited, bull looks great, he's running out, see him in October at a farm show. He says, the bull lost a little weight, but I got him back, he's doing good. Can't wait for February to get here so I can see his calves. Why do I calve in February? I do not know. I'm going to change it to June. Anyway, so then, has calves look great, comes back to the bull sale, loved them, everything's great, calves are growing good. When does he market those cattle? When do you feel like that guy markets his cattle? Anybody want to answer? I believe a lot of times when we think about our commercial customer, when he gets ready to market his cattle, when it rains. It rained, he went out, he checked his cows, he honked the horn, they come in the pen, let's take them to town. Anybody ever see that scenario? Then what phone call do we get? Hey, my $8,000 bull, my neighbor Frank brought his calves to town. He bought his bull out of the weigh pen, his calves brought $100 less than mine did. Anybody ever get to have that conversation? So we got to go forth, we got to give those guys a platform where they can market their cattle. Superior has some value-added programs. Doc's going to go into these a little later. I'm not going into them. These slides are from 2018. He's done way more research than I have. He'll give you the exact dollar amounts. But the first thing I want to talk about is a vaccination protocol. That's dollars per hundred that you gain from a VAC 34, which would be 2 rounds of shots. A VAC 45, which would be 4 rounds of shots, and that's the dollars per hundred you get. A VAC 45 will be a weaned steer or heifer. How many of you know what kind of vaccinations your customers get or give? You know, what happens is they haul those cattle to town. I've seen it at the local sale barns. I even see it when I go to rep cattle for Superior Livestock. Those guys come forth and they say, they've had 2 rounds of shots. Okay, which ones did you get? That one called black leg, and I did it once. Well, what about the other round? Yeah, right? 2 rounds of shots. You ever heard a sale barn auctioneer say they're double good and they're double vacced? They're really good and they've had both rounds of shots. What do you think the number one thing a buyer wants? Number one thing a buyer wants out of his cattle: health. Health. Then he wants genetics and performance. Right? And he wants them on a program. That's where we're at with source and age, and that's where we're at with NHTC. I could go into what each one of those are and what they represent. You know, source and age can be done in a lot of different ways. You are probably a lot more familiar with, you know, AGT and what's coming down the order and what's coming down the line. We may all have to someday be source and age. We might want to go ahead and familiarize ourselves with what direction we want to do that and how we want to do that. NHTC is got to be a third-party verified program, non-hormonal. That doesn't mean they just don't have an implant. You got to have feed. Will we all give our heifers? Luteolase, 6, 7 other shots. We're getting ready to roll to it. That stuff's got to be all tucked away, safe and sound, and third-party verification will come with that and come through that. But the one I want to talk to you about, and the one I want to really get in depth a little bit about right here off the bat, is Superior Progressive Genetics. We're seeing $1.67 100 premium from that. And what Progressive Genetics does, Mr. Gibbs here, thought he was. He'd be proud of me for putting this, he'd be proud, look at that sign there. Put you up on there and gives you recognition. That's what you can do. This is a superior platform. This is a national platform. Okay, so the cattle's VAC 60, they're on Superior Progressive Genetics. That's who they're sired by. That's who they used, was Allied, and they used Select Sires, and that's what they did. Have any of your commercial cattlemen hauled their cattle to town and recognized you? So if our commercial cattlemen aren't recognizing us, the feeder's not going to recognize us, and we're not going to recognize the performance that's in those cattle. So I think it's very vital and very important that we look at what Superior has done with their progressive genetics, put it right back in your own personal operation. I think you can take that, you can take a small piece of paper. You ever seen an auctioneer at a sale barn sit there with his elbows on the counter waiting for him to weigh the next draft of cattle and not say anything? I know as an auctioneer that is hard. They want something to talk about. They want the cattle to talk about. They want to talk about the genetics. If you took a small piece of paper, said, these are Jack's. Jack did this at vaccination time when he branded. Jack did this when he weaned. Jack used Optimizer. Jack used Cowboy Cut. Jack did so on and so forth. It will bring tons and tons of value to not only him, but to you. So one way we can do that, and Doc's going to talk about this in big time depth, but this is, I'm putting Doc under a lot of stress, sorry. You can handle it. IGS, the Feeder Profit Calculator. Are most of you familiar with that? It's free to our commercial cattlemen. They can take it, they can put it on their phone, they can put down everything they did with their vaccinations. They can even print from it, and that could be something that they could take to the local livestock market, that they could put forth, that it can be talked about, and then your brand can be talked about as well with this. I can't probably sit in front of you today and tell you that this program, maybe in 5 years, we'll have the full proof of what it will be. We can run a query and tell you exactly what this program is bringing you, dollars per 100 back to our commercial cattlemen, to their pocket. But for me to tell you today, it's a little fresh. I think if we walked to any one of our local sale barns and said, here, these are what these cattle are in a feeder calf calculator, they're all 5 stars, all through every one of them. That sale barn owner is probably going to look at us and go, say, what? And then he passes out to the buyers, and the buyers, do they know? So we got to get them a little more informed on that. But here's where it's got value, in my opinion, is that if our customers, if our commercial cattlemen can put all their information in there, when it comes time for them to come back and buy bulls the next time, when it comes time for them to think about females and whatever they're doing, it shows the proof in their calves, whether they're doing it right or whether they're doing it wrong, and what it really comes out in the end. It gives them the opportunity to be able to leverage their bull battery to a buyer base, but we got to get it out there. It's there, and it's happening. We have got a program just signed up with Superior, and they are, IGS is giving over $10,000 to the Superior rep that offers the most cattle at the bell ringer sale in January. So it's out there, and it's happening, and we're really, really excited for it. So we got to deliver value to, this is not the right slide. I should have changed it. Deliver value to your customers. I wrote that first, you must. And I got to thinking about that, and I was like, there's only going to be 20 people here at this meeting, Jackie said. I don't want to have to tell 20 people. That's why I'm sweating. I don't want to tell 20 people you must deliver value. So I wrote, after I looked at it and after I wrote this the other evening, I thought, do you deliver value to your customers with service after the sale? Offering options is the key to really give them a value. You know, that guy, he walked out, he bought that $8,000 bull. He hadn't even got here yet to get focused. He hadn't even looked through his bifocals yet. What value are we going to give him? You know when it started? As soon as he wrote the check, that's when it starts. That's when the marketing starts for us. That's when the marketing starts for him. And that's what we have to do to really build our brand and customer loyalty by working with market professionals. I'll go to the next one as well. Who you partner with is a reflection of your brand and vital to long-term success of both you and your customers. So when you think about branding and you think about branding you and who you work with as a market professional, you guys know who the sale barn owners are in your area. You guys know who the Superior Livestock reps are in your area. If you don't, it'd be good if you familiarize yourself with them. I'm going to be the first to say, I wish our president, Danny Jones, was here because I've told him 100 times. He'd be really proud of me for saying it to you. We got some reps that don't understand a lot of this stuff. You got to find the right kind of professional. You got to look for the right kind of professional to do that. The sale barn manager, the field rep, the guy that's in your area, the guy that works with it, he'll come to you, you go to him, you call him, he'll love to hear from you, and you give him all that information, and it'll bring value to the cattle in the ring, and it will bring value to you and your brand. When you think of a partner and who you're going to work with, and that's a success of you and them both, I think of a buyer. You think them buyers don't know, or you think them buyers sitting in the seats don't know? I used to think forever, there's no way they can trace my cattle. There's no way at all. And I had some cattle when I owned the sale barn at Gas City. I had some cattle, and I had a guy that didn't bid on my cattle the next time. And I said, Jim Keller, Oakley Feeders, why did you not bid on my cattle? He said, they don't feed worth a, okay. How'd you trace my cattle? You put them with 6 other groups. They know, friends. They know. I was in the truck with Bob Foote and Greg Foote. I was glad Greg was in the front. If anybody knows any of them, you'd understand what I'm saying. Bob's in the back. You see that gray steer right over there? I said, yeah, he come out of Fort Scott, and he come off of such and such right south of town. If anybody ever buys me another one of them, I'll fire him. Glad I didn't buy him. They know. Whether it's 15 at a time, whether it's 25 at a time, or 22 at a time. They might leave Manhattan with 3 different owners, and they might go right south of town to the ranch. They're tagged. They follow them. They'll know your genetics. They'll know that you can build your brand. You've got to build a relationship with that buyer just like you do with your marketing representative. Now, I'm going to tell you something. Clint Berry would be really proud of me for saying this. Those marketing representatives need guys like you, because in my position, when you call me, Gary Fike calls me and says, hey, I got a customer. You ever heard of a referral business? The real estate business works on a referral basis. And when I got a customer, I help you. It works both ways. Those guys, they'll give you a couple dollars a head. You don't even have to ask them. Say, I got a customer. He's got feeder cattle. I would like for you to help me do this. If the guy running the sale barn don't do that, he's not a very good professional. Get with him. Let him know what you're doing. Let him know what you're trying to accomplish. It will build your brand. Nothing better than sitting anywhere whether it's on SLA, whether it's on national TV, or whether it's in the sale barn or anywhere else, and say that these cattle come out of such and such, and they're out of this program, and the last 2 years they did this. Now, when you say, how do I get that information? Greg Foote and Gotches and Dorings and everybody else, they don't want you to know exactly what your cattle did. It's just part of the business. It's just what it is. They're just not going to give you all that information. But if you tell them they're coming to town again, they'll say, cattle did great last year. Cattle yielded great. Cattle gained great. Cattle hit the bunk great. They did everything. I'll try them again. Can you give me a little information on them? I got a guy that's really progressive, a guy that's really wanting to do something. Yeah, I'll share it with you one time. Don't tell anybody. That's exactly what they'll tell you. So we talked about NHTC, all natural, third-party verified. This is a number from Superior. Merck Animal Health put this together. This slide just came out. This is the number of calves, percent of calves that were implanted in 1995 to 2018. Remember what happened in 2007 and 8? We couldn't implant them. We had to keep them natural. They wanted to do this and this and this. Almost 84%, 86% of the cattle that go to the feed yard get implanted. If you are not, this is what I tell my customers, this is what I would recommend you tell your customers. If you are not going to be NHTC third-party verified, you need to implant. You're giving away pounds and you're giving away dollars. So do we encourage them to implant or not? Well, we can do the math. You can read that. There's niche programs as NHTC, GAP certified, that are paying some big premiums. We seen cattle this last week in a tougher market. We know what we're all up against. We all want 1,000 for a 550, 600-pound steer, and we're going to get $875 to $9.25. NHTC programs, we're seeing $17 to $22 a hundred premium in them cattle that are third-party verified, audited, and the whole 9 yards. You're seeing it. 1.3 million head offered on Superior Livestock. 670,000 of those were not third-party verified, NHTC, GAP certified, so on and so forth. 492,000 of those were not implanted. So when you think about that, and you just think of a premium of $1.100 a calf, that's $3 million. The weight loss alone was $17 million. $20 million lost in 2018 by pounds per dollar, $1.100 for calves that were not implanted. I don't worry about that bottom one because I'm not an investor and I'm not part of the company. You're supposed to laugh. Hey, it's working. So when the gavel falls at the end of the day, what we really need to be doing, what I see we should be doing, we can be doing as seed stock purebred operators, as commercial cattlemen ourselves, is we need to get part and be part of the value-added programs for our customers. Need to get them on a vaccination protocol. And when I say that, sometimes it takes, hey, can you show me a receipt? Just show me a receipt. I can't spell Bovishield. It always works for me. The only way I got through high school was because of my wife. So show me the receipt. The next one is be progressive with your genetics. Those guys that are buying those genetics, that gives you the opportunity to put your progressive genetics out there, put them out in front of those buyers, let them know when those cattle come in the ring, let them know when them cattle leave on the truck private treaty or whether they sell on SLA, let them know your progressive genetics. NHTC is another one. You're going to do it or you're not. Implant them or not. Natural, keep them natural, go with third-party audit. Maybe one of the most important, the last two most important. How many times have you ever heard somebody tell you what the cattle are eating when they come in the ring at the sale barn? Never. Never. How many times have a guy bought a 5-weight calf and took them home and 3.5, 4 weeks later said, whew, they're a wreck. When's National Dead Calf Month? Anybody know that? Order buyers call it National Dead Calf Month. It's October. Weather's 75, 80 in the day, low at night, they're going to get sick. If they're on a vaccination program, if they're on the right feed program, if you've got all that in line, them order buyers know that, and they can buy the cattle with confidence. It'll bring value. It'll add a lot of success. Focus on the market. Become familiar with the market. That's the first thing they're going to ask you. You know when the average commercial cattleman thinks about the market and what his cattle are going to bring? When he brings them to town. Now, there's progressive ranchers out there, don't get me wrong. There's guys. I just got home from a ranching for profit school. I just actually learned myself what it means to draw a line to direct cost, draw a line to overhead, draw a line to your break even. Everything north of that is profit. Everything behind it is an expense and loss. I just figured out that one of my biggest losses is I don't plan far enough ahead to market my cattle correctly to be able to build profit. So if we plan ahead and get our guys planning ahead and become familiar with the market and know what the market is, it's really hard to do. I mean, it's right there on a website and it's right there on an app. You can pull it up every day. The time of year. What time of year are you going to sell them? You got to know when the goods and when the bad time is. Where are you going to market them? How are you going to market them? You're going to sell them private treaty? You're going to sell them on the country page? You're going to list them on cattle range? You're going to sell them at a sale barn? You're going to sell them to the same guy you've been selling them to the last 10 years with one bid? You're going to sell them at auction? How are they going to market them? Help them get them marketed. Find them buyers for them. If you don't know, your professional will. And I think the last, and it might be the most important, for us in this room is we need to know who these buyers are. These guys that are buying these $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 bulls and they're going out and selling those calves wherever they're selling them, wherever they're moving them. We need to know where they're going. We need to be in full contact with that so we can know that it's either working. And need to know, we need to know whether or not we've put too much emphasis on birth weight and the difference spread in numbers between weaning weight and yearling weight, or whether we've really put focus on performance, eye appeal, carcass, and what's really coming out of these cattle. And we can't get that if we don't know our buyers, if we don't know who's really taking them and who's really coming to us. So, I love this. You think a professional is expensive, hire an amateur. Has anybody ever heard that before? So this is what we do, if this will play. Chip, you may have to come here. Keep talking. Oh, it's probably not going to throw it up there. So this slide, this little YouTube video is of a guy that did everything correct all the way through. So for those of you that were dozing off, oh yeah, can you back it up? So we leave these kind of meetings, I do at least, and I'm this guy.
Bring your own phone. No, your own real phone when you switch to Google Fi, a phone plan by Google.
It's gone. So this guy goes, has anybody ever seen The Welder?
On your computer?
Yeah, he does a great job. For those of you who hadn't seen it, he goes down, he's got this beautiful handrail made, and he gets down to the end, he sticks his head through, and he tack welds it. and he tries to get out.
And even helps me find the right words to use.
There he is. He's an amateur. But the cool part about it is he just turns around and grabs a grinder like, oh, I've done this before. This is no big deal. Grabs a grinder and gets himself out. And that's what I feel like we do. I know I do. Come to meetings like this and get all amped up and get all focused, and then you go home and you start getting it built, and then when it comes time to do things, there we are. So what I would like for you to take away, that if you can get with a professional, you guys are all professional yourself. You know how to market, you know how to promote, you know how to do all of that. Do that for your commercial guy. Get down on his level and get him where he can use your brand to promote you. I believe, I hope, that is it.
Charlie, thank you very, very much. We're going to bring you back. Just set that thing. We'll bring Charlie back in a few minutes for some questions for the panel. We'll let him go relax, get a drink, recoup. He's probably going to get on his iPhone here and sell a few bulls from distance. I'm guessing, Gary, I can sense it. Okay, coming up next. So now, thinking like our customer. This is pragmatic. This is what step number one was. Now, the person that Charlie and his team interact with is coming up here next. Most of you are probably familiar with Craig Uden. He's certainly no stranger to Simmental circles, a semi-enthusiast his own self. We know his relationship with Darr feeders, not too far north of here. Some of you likely know him from the fact that he's a Politico. So you might know him from his NCBA circles. So loads of experience and background. Craig's going to give you the skinny from his perspective as a cattle feeder.
Thank you. I've been taking notes today, and I do a lot of this kind of impromptu. I will send, next time when you want a picture and a background, I will, because that one's pretty old. I bring a little bit of a unique perspective because I do run about 1,600 mama cows. And it's not rocket science to get that end goal, but I work a little different on that, and that's kind of how I buy feeder cattle and how I want to look at things. I've got the end goal in mind. And I think something we get hung up on a little bit is our production costs. You know, we don't follow our production costs on the commercial side once in a while, and then we expect Charlie to bail us out at the market, and we know that there's a lot of different reasons why markets go up and down, but ranching for profit won't be very profitable this year. So we got to fix on costs. So what I want in my cattle is I look at the end first, and that's a 1,500-pound steer. That's what I base it on, 1,500-pound steer and 15 months of age. That's a target, and that's a big target. We hit it on about 75% of my calves. And I'm not picking out the, I'll stretch, but I got to have a cow that's going to conceive, and she's going to have that calf 9, 10, 11 years, because there's really no sense you put all the emphasis to developing that heifer. She's got to kick back and produce her entire life. So I put a lot of selection pressure on the females. I go in the middle of the herd, and I've got a terminal herd. I don't pick anything out. One thing in the feedlot then. When we have that target in mind at the end, one thing we're trying to buy cattle today, and the industry changes, it's always going to change. And if we're not ready for change, we better find a different business, because it's going to not look the same in 5 years as it did 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And today, there's a lot of formula pricing, okay? We heard the packer making pretty good killing right now on a certain amount of cattle because of the fire. But he forward books a lot of that inventory to the retailer, and a lot of people are forward booking cattle to him up and down the system, because there's a lot of costs involved and people need to know where they're going to be at. But most of these cattle today, if you don't produce cattle that can kind of hit $25 to $40 on a grid, then you're behind. I think Charlie made the point and this is something, education's been talked about. We got a lot of educating to do up and down the chain, and sometimes we lose that. Where's Donnell and his convenience of having the cell phone? That's great, but we've lost our communication skills up and down the chain a little bit, communicating what we need back and forth. Must deliver value, can't agree more. Build brand and customer loyalty. We have to do it every day. We have fewer and fewer customers. Number 3, though, I wrote down was only as good as your last bull sale, or in my case, my closeout. Did I perform for that person? Because I have to go get customers too. I'm in a commercial cattle feeding operation, and I have to deliver day in and day out. Part of that's price. The main thing is performance, and did those cattle deliver what I said they were going to deliver? And I think we have some challenges out there. As an industry, we're still miles and miles away. You know, we brought up pulmonary hypertension. We got BRD that's at levels that we haven't seen forever. It doesn't get any better. We got feet and leg issues in the feed yard that are immense. I compliment the Simmental breed because I don't see that near as much as some of these other breeds. But it's a big issue because we can't get the weight on those cattle that we need. They aren't as predictable. They don't stand up. They miss the target, and they miss it pretty bad. And you got a lot of dollars spent in that entity. So the feet and leg issue is really, really something that should be an easy fix, and we got to get after that in a hurry, because it's really costing the industry a lot of dollars by having some of that lost performance. And think about it, if you're a bull guy, you're selling a bull that doesn't have sound feet and legs, and he spent $8,000. He's not going to get rid of that bull for 6 or 7 years, so he's going to perpetuate that through his herd forever. So we have to continue to help educate our customers, and that's what we strive to do at our location. I've got customers been with me 37, 38 years, ever since I showed up, and it's a long game. And that's what sustains us, is our long-term customers. And you can't just expect them to show up and feed their cattle year in, year out. And some of them pass on, get out of business or whatever, but you have to relate to those customers what's pertinent at the time, and you have to stay focused and involved so that you have a long-term customer. Are they taking your genetics? You've got these EPDs, you've got everything there. Are they using them correctly? What's their goal? You have to help define that. What's important, what's not. I think we've got way too much milk in these cattle today. From a cow-calf and even a feedlot standpoint, people say, what's your cost to gain? Oh, it's 80 to $1 in a tough winter this year. 80 to $1. And a lot of that's just inefficiency. We've put sometimes too much milk and too much performance in some of these cattle, and it's really costs that we can't recover, in my opinion, that really aren't doing us all that much good to the bottom line. It adds cost, but is it really returning us any return? If you look at fertility, it continues to be stagnant, and we look at weaning weights, they're pretty flat. So we have to look at the economics as well. But challenges in the feeding industry, Charlie was talking about some pretty big guys out there. 20 feeding companies today in the U.S. control about 40+% of the cattle on feed. And that should ring a little bell out there, okay? I'm not one of them, but it's harder and harder for me to compete, so I have to compete on the edges and find the really good cattle, and I have to add value. Eventually, if they don't perform, they just don't come back. A lot of these guys read numbers, and I would argue with Charlie, those aren't premiums up there for VAC 34 and 45. It's a discount to the rest of the industry for not using it, okay? We will not buy an animal without a VAC 34. Occasionally, we may stumble on a 24, and if they're a huge discount, we'll take a shot. But very, very seldom will we we just won't do it. We don't need to. There's a lot of cattle out there. Lost my train of thought. I want to go back a little bit to the feet and legs. We are taking our customers one by one to their pens and before they're fat and showing them these cattle today and saying, you know, can we improve here? We need to be looking at it. It's more prevalent in other cattle. I think one thing you guys can really promote is the heterosis aspect of things. It's coming. It's coming. It's getting more and more. When we're buying cattle, we're looking for sim-cross genetics or other crossbred cattle, because when we hang these cattle up, we need the health. That's first and foremost today. It's getting harder and harder to find people that can pull cattle, and it's an added cost we really don't need. Every one we pull, it affects the grading, it affects the overall performance. So health is important, health is important, health is important. Genetics, extremely important, although we've attained a lot of our genetic, you know, we're grading 80% choice and prime today. That's pretty good. That is what's driving the beef demand out there, is the 80% choice or better. That's something that's not going to go away. So if you're not obtaining that, that's something to look at. 80% choice, and it was 55% choice and about 1.5% prime about 10 years ago. So what's demand done? Demands went sky high. If we're going to continue to have a vibrant industry, exports is going to be a part of that, and part of our exports has to go into the choice and prime category as well. We only have so many people that are going to consume our product in the U.S. It's just a factor of numbers. We want to increase production, but we only have so many people to eat it. This year, the average man, woman, and child in the United States will eat 220 pounds of protein. That's a lot. Next year, we're going to eat 221 and a half. I mean, we can't keep producing without having export. I think exports is scary because right now we don't have it, and it's putting somewhat of a bind on our industry, but we're going to have it in the future. And I do think there is a lot of potential out there. But we ship everything into branded programs. We're going to see, we're averaging, it's really pretty easy to sit there and collect $50 a head. That's what drives part of the premium on some of these calves, is that performance, not only on the hoof. They have to have it all. They got to gain, and they got to hang it up and grade. And people just have to have a target in mind. I got some Simmental cattle that are extremely good on growth. I've got a set of Simmental cattle that is leading the pack this year. Leading the pack. These cattle click off $100 a head average on a grid all day long. And when I say 50 or 100, I'm not figuring in yield. I'm figuring in carcass merit only, no yield. Yield fluctuates enough, so I take that out. That's big dollars. That's a lot of dollars. And when you look at, are your customers understanding that? And Charlie's got a lot of things up there as far as how many bells and whistles he can put on that page. Pretty soon his book's going to get about that thick if we keep adding bells and whistles. But a lot of these cattle are bringing that premium because we know it. Now, we give information back. Now I know where I wanted to go. That's what impromptu gets me in trouble once in a while. We trace every animal. You sell, let's say you sell, I go to the sale barn. I buy Joe's load and I buy Bob's load. They're pinned separately. And then I buy two other guys' and they're pinned separately. I separate them on the truck. I bring them in. I keep them sorted. I EID everyone. I trace every animal from basically when they walk in that door. That's how we get our carcass data back. We trace every animal. We trace them on the health. Did they start? Were they efficient? Do I want them to come back? Do I want them back next year? That's what drives me all the time as an independent buying cattle for my feeder guys. If they don't perform, I'm not coming back. There's just too many of them out there. I will overpay for the right cattle because that predictability, having them 2, 3, 4 years, knowing where your pitfalls are, knowing where you're going to gain your premiums. Are they efficient? Do they die? Do they die? This industry's got a heck of a problem out there right now with too many cattle not making their end point. A lot of that goes back to management. I wish you had a nutrition category on your books. I wish I knew what you were using for trace minerals. I well understand that cattle, I don't know how many states are represented here. I know there's probably 30. There's 30 different types of terrain and how you're raising cattle. I understand that. But the basic nutrient requirements and trace minerals for your region or your cattle or your operation need to be looked at and analyzed. Because a lot of all the genetics we pour into this and all the vaccination that we do to these cattle, if we don't manage the inputs that we're putting into these cattle or stacking them, we can have some real wrecks. I like to look at the modern day beef animal as a little bit of a NASCAR racer. Every year they go faster and faster and faster. But when they crash, there ain't nothing left of the car. Because when they go down, they go down. As we stack genetics, I think we have to stack whole management of that program. We're asking for big yearling weights. We just can't, we have to analyze, our setting, and we have to also not only manage it on an average, we have to look at a year-to-year comparison. I happened to be at Goodmanson speaking with a lot of sandhillers this last week. And some of the data that was presented there, last year we were so wet, the protein during, we had washy grass, went from a drought to grass belly high. And conception was horrible, weights were horrible. It was at everybody's fingertips, but nobody was looking at it. The protein content in June, when most of those cattle were being bred, was lower than the average for a normal September in Nebraska sandhills. No wonder they didn't get bred. There was no nutritional value out there. But we're not always looking for that. I mean, in order to stay in business, we have to have a pregnant cow, and we have to have some weight to wean and something to sell. And that's where that cost gets so high, is when we have too much fallout. So just food for thought as I analyze somewhat of my own operation. So we target a calf. If we're weaning a calf, we're targeting if we go to a grow yard, we're targeting a 2.8, and they come in the yard, they need to be about a 3.7, 3.8 on a typical March-born calf. And he needs to weigh 14 and a quarter minimum. That's asking a lot for these calves that are 14 months of age. But that's your industry. That's what the big boys, and they're gonna crank these things. And that's the problem when we see some of this death loss. Some of it we're creating with length of days, adding more weight. We were talking back here about pulmonary edema. Part of that is, we're making a 1,500-pound animal with basically the same thoracic size as we've had when they were 1,100 pounds. And consequently, we wonder why we have some wrecks. But that's the way the industry rolls. But they will identify these calves. What I'm asking you to do is get more interactive with your commercial producers, set some goals with them, or have some goals, have them set some goals. Have them have a plan. Have them have the end in mind. I don't care if they're selling them on Superior, the barn, private tree, I don't care. One of the biggest wrecks we had, and it's just stupid. We do everything right. Trucking. Trucking is one of the biggest disasters we see. Had a set of cattle come in last fall, beautiful set of cattle, feed like a house afire, year in, year out. Trucker guy's GPS, snowing, he got in a blizzard, he just parked it on the wrong side of the interstate, just waited there. They all broke with microplasts. We saved them all. Did they perform? No. They were screwed up from day one. Had a guy, thought he was doing me a favor. It's a 1,200-mile haul. We've been doing this for 20 years. He got a new truck. Boy, that guy could get him there. I guess he could get him there. He loaded him. It's about 1,200 miles from Browning, Montana to Darr Feedlot. He loaded them at noon Mountain, which is 1 my time, and by God, they were in by 7:30 next morning. And everything was done right, vaccinated, everything. Lost 5 head in the first week. That's a point of no return. I mean, we just got to use some common sense throughout this whole thing. But they're not, you need to follow through, because sometimes it isn't anybody's fault, but you have to find a reason why there was a disaster on those cattle, or why that bull didn't work for that guy. You know, I question, now I'm going to get into some of my, I was going to get up here and yak when these guys were talking about the show ring. I think the show ring is a tremendous tool for the young people. I think it's an opportunity for the universities, the land grants, to take those people and then turn them into cattle producers that understand the phenotypical side of things, but then talk to them and move them into the production side. That is one way to create the base, is by having that. But I think we make too many assumptions that most commercial producers understand EPDs and the direction the industry is going. I think they're just kind of wandering out there, and whatever fad they have or whatever somebody told them, they go that way. And they could, you know, they may be going broke, but by golly, they're having fun at doing it. But it just, I really think we assume too much in this industry. I've got guys been feeding with me 30 years, and we learn something every day. If you're not learning, you're going backwards, you're dying. If you're not changing, you're going backwards, you're dying. I'm not sure I'm in agreement with Dr. Dykeman's having a People's Choice Award at the show. If we look at our presidential candidates, I'm not sure we'd be good judges of having the public view that. And I think a good point was made today. Find whatever it is. And I think it is not going extreme either way. I mean, if I got 4.5 pound gain in cattle, they're probably not the best cows. If I got 3 pound a day gain in cattle, they're not doing it for, at the end, he won't have any buyers. He might have a hell of a set of cows that's low cost, but there ain't gonna be any takers. There's a balance in there. You know, think about me as a feedlot. You think I breed 250, 60 heifers a year, and I run them just as hard and rough as I can. I could put them in a feed yard and bunk them and feed them up, but I understand that I don't want a condition score of, I want them girls to work. I want them to learn how to forage, and I want them to become a cow. And I put a huge amount of selection pressure on them. Bull goes in that day, pulls out 28 days, and what's bred's bred. Then you keep that cycle into the first cycle, and they stay more in the, you know, we don't have as much fallout in the second, going from second to third calvers. And that's what makes cattle feed better too. You know, what works on the ranch usually works in the feedlot. I'm not saying that an efficient mama out there is always going to make an efficient calf, because I don't believe grass and concentrate always equals. But if you're in the middle of the road and you have a tendency to work there, I do think there is some ties there. But I think if you stay scientific based, the predictability comes, and it really does. I mean, We've got several thousand cattle we can set our clock to about what they're going to make, about what they're going to gain. You know, we got computer programs that just for the weather and this and that, but you still got to look at the cattle. And that goes back to your judging, whether you're judging whether you need a show ring or whether you need EPDs. I see a lot of feet and leg issues because people don't have a clue what a good one looks like, and they buy everything off an EPD. I get calls all the time. Go look at this bull. I said, he ain't worth the crap. He can't function. He's got bad feet. He's narrow. Don't care. I need him in my operation. He hits all the targets on the EPDs. That's not a sound way of doing business, in my opinion. You have to have both, you know. Fat cattle buyers do look at cattle. If they just blindly went out there, they wouldn't be a fat cattle buyer very much longer. But we thought we had a huge issue with the Zolpaterol. We did. There was an issue because people couldn't handle it right again. They didn't have the tools to make it all work. But it wasn't the salvation of the feet and leg problems that we got in these feed yards. And we see it. And the cattle can't move. We got more cattle down on trucks. We got more cattle that break a leg. There's just, that's one thing that, again, that has to be addressed. Because if they're not functional and they can't move, they're not going to gain. So, if I went beyond my time a little bit, you're kind of standing there. I'm rambling now. I'd rather answer questions. I like answering questions. All right. Keep doing what you're doing. Stay scientific. Stay in the middle. Don't go too far. I do like the carload. I do have one story on that. I got to judge a carload show of a breed that was probably where the Simmentals were 25, 30 years ago, trying to find relevance. And I'm pretty much a feet and leg guy. Want cattle that are functional, want some cattle barrel. Anyway, I judged that, and they invited me back the next year. And I couldn't come back 3, but, you know, boy, you did a lot of good. So another breed hired me to come to a pen show, and that was the biggest disaster ever seen for structural correctness and foot placement and movement. And the people leading that they didn't want me to finish the show, but they never invited me back. And that breed today is not very relevant in the beef industry because it's all about the end product. We raise beef in 50 states, basically. Everybody does it a little bit different, but at the end of the day, it's a piece of meat on there, and it's choice or prime. And we just got to figure out how to get there. You guys know your customers better than I do. You know what they can and can't do, but you need to help them out. The people that are going to be in this business are the people that participate. The people that don't show up won't be here much longer. Just the way it is. Thank you.
Hold on, Craig. If I don't give you this, I'll get an ash chewer.
Okay, thank you.
Craig will be back up here in a few moments, and if you haven't started compiling your questions yet, shame on you. So, to round out this particular session, let's see here. Dr. Ken. Okay, Jackie, just come do what you do. So, yeah. So, many of you certainly are familiar with Dr. Odde. Those of you who are wearing purple, you have no choice but to be aware of Dr. Odde. You would be dismissed summarily if you weren't. I have to say, actually, before you all got him, one of the moments professionally where I've gone, ugh, missed the boat there, I believe it was 06 when I was teaching at the University of Missouri when we had a stab at getting this man to come be our department head, and we messed up. And so, yeah, and that's when, yes, our North Dakota friends are like, yeah, watch us, look what we did. So, Dr. Odde has a long track record. You can read his bio in the book. But for our conversation today, I think the important piece here is he has an appreciation and done a deep dive into some of the superior data, more so than probably almost anybody else has ever done. And back in January, I got to watch him give a talk to some folks that really impressed me. It made a lot of sense and put a lot of data right in front of you and smacked me in the face just a little bit. And there's a lot of folks who want to do that. Not many people get it done. So Dr. Odde did something you all want to do. I'm going to let him talk to you just a little while.
Thanks, Chip. What I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about feeder calf value, but primarily what I'm going to do is use the work we've done with the Superior Livestock database, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how that was created. I might back up just a little bit. So my career has been in academics. I've also worked in the industry, worked for Pfizer for a number of years, and then my wife and I have a ranch in north central South Dakota that's actually managed by our youngest son, so that kind of tends to keep us pretty grounded in our business up there as well. So what I'd like to do, whoops, there we go. So this is really what I want to talk a little bit about. It's our Superior Livestock data analysis and what I would call trends. I want to talk a little bit about trends over time, some of the factors influencing calf prices, and then some of the value-added programs. So this is far from comprehensive from everything that we've done with the Superior Livestock database. We've actually published a number of different papers, especially over the last few years. I'll be pulling a little bit from some of those, but obviously not everything that we've actually done. I guess it takes 2 pushes to make it go. Okay. I want to start out with, we actually started this project in 1995. So that's about, 24, 25 years ago. And I had left Colorado State University. I'd gone to work in industry for SmithKline Beecham. We were doing some work with Superior at the time, and that's about the time Superior was creating their value-added calf programs. Their VAC 24, VAC 34, VAC 45, and VAC Precon. And we set up a system at that time where Superior provided catalogs and sale prices, and then we put a contract in place with Colorado State University at that time, and I had just left Colorado State, and we did that with that shows you how we were getting prices at that point in time. But I want to mention Mike King. Mike worked for me at Colorado State University after I left Colorado State. He was still there. We put a contract in place with Colorado State, and then Mike has really been the person that's done all the data work with the Superior Livestock data then for the last 24 or 25 years. And Mike is actually here today. And Mike, if you want to raise your hand, because this is a lifelong endeavor, if you really kind of think about what we've actually done here. And I was really kind of in charge of this for the years I worked at Pfizer. I was kind of out of the system for a while, but Mike continued with that work. And then about 7 years ago, we kind of got back together working on this additionally. So we've done a lot of things, and now more recently, looking at a lot of trends in the data. So where we started with this project is we really started back in 1995, and the first question is, how do these calf health programs affect sale price of calves? And that was really what our initial question was, and at that time, Superior was run by Jim Odde, and we worked a lot with Paul Branch down in Fort Worth, and that was at the time when they had introduced these, and they were providing us with some data, and we were doing inputting and analysis. So those calf health programs, you've already heard a little bit about them, but a VAC 24, basically calves vaccinated 2 to 4 months of age, and then sold off the cow at weaning. VAC 34, vaccinated 3 to 4 weeks prior to weaning and sold off the cow. VAC 45 are 2 rounds of viral vaccinations plus at least 45 days of weaning, and then VAC Precon are put together calves that have been off cows for at least 45 days. So the first thing I want to share with you is kind of what we've seen in trends over time as we think about how this industry has actually changed. So if we go back, well, this part I'm going to actually show you is from 1995 to 2018. It's 190 summer video auctions with over 82,000 lots of calves in this particular analysis. So lots are roughly 100 head. Obviously, they sell truckload-sized lots, so on average, lots are typically a little over 100 head. If you go back to 1995 and you look at the percentage of lots that were what we would call unweaned and unvaccinated, about 40% of the lots at that point in time had no weaning or no vaccination. So essentially, calves were sold as calves with almost no history of any kind of vaccination programs. That's really where we were. Some of you people have about as much gray hair as I do, and you might remember we had lots of surges of efforts at various points in times for preconditioning programs. Most of those were sponsored by states, extension, state veterinary organizations, and most of them were purely what I would call supply-driven. They didn't work, okay? They don't work because they're not demand-driven. And what I would argue is that Superior put the first program in place that really had the opportunity to be demand-driven. So if you can demonstrate over time that calves have reduced risk of disease, you will begin to see those will be sustainable programs and they'll be sustainable over time. And I think that's what we've actually seen and we've witnessed with the Superior program. So now if we take the trend lines for participation in these programs, we take the VAC-24 program, very low at the beginning. It got up to maybe about 10%, and that's about where it's actually stayed. And there's been small premiums for VAC-24 at various points in time, but not very much, not a whole lot is what we would actually see. If you take VAC-34, which frankly has become the most popular of the calf health programs, we started out at about 11%, and then if you go up here to, see if I can make this, we got about 2005, 2006, we're getting up here about 47%, and now it's been pretty flat since that point in time. So again, that's where a lot of the market is, and these are people that are saying, yes, I can do a VAC-34 program. I probably can't do a VAC-45 program, or I'm unwilling to do a VAC-45 program for the value that I see being paid for that particular program. And here's what the VAC-45 looked like. So we got up here to maybe 26, 27%, and that's about where it stayed. So if you read Drover's Journal, there's been an article in there. I've actually seen it twice now about preconditioning, and it says, somebody's quoted in there, says, preconditioning is a no-brainer. And they're talking about weaning calves. And I will tell you that weaning calves, preconditioning with weaning calves is not a no-brainer, okay? It's an economic decision that a producer actually has to make, and he or she is weighing whether they can manage those calves during that 45-day period. Do they have the facilities to manage the calf? Do they have the feedstuffs to manage the calf? And is it going to be economically beneficial? They're taking the risk of calf death loss associated with holding those calves for another 45 days. So I think it's an economic decision, and I would say at least among Superior customers, these tend to now have kind of leveled out where the market's about 27, 28% VAC-45, about 50% VAC-34, and maybe about 10% VAC-24, and the rest kind of in other categories. So I would actually argue that the market has kind of discovered what the value is, and those that it makes sense for are participating, and those that it doesn't make sense for probably aren't. Let me make one other point here. We believe the Superior data is actually pretty representative of cow herds about 300 cows and bigger in the U.S. We don't think it necessarily represents the small herds, but we do think it's a pretty good representation for the larger cow herds that we actually have. If you look at their areas of strength, northern plains, kind of the southern plains, and then some states in the southeast are pretty well represented within the Superior data as well. Now, the next question is, what's the value of these programs? Whether we call them premiums or discounts, they're price differences compared with some base, and I'll share a few of those with you. The way we do that is we use a regression technique, backward selection, where we start with all the variables we think could affect calf price, we run the model to the point where we end up with a model of all these significant variables affecting calf price. We started out when this was first done in 1995. We had 12 variables in the model that we thought potentially affected calf price. Mike, I looked at the last one we did, and there's 26 variables in the model. Part of that is we're now measuring a lot more things. We got a lot more potential factors. If you start looking at all the programs that we're actually talking about, we got a lot more potential factors. So what I'm actually showing here is on the vertical axis, this is a percent of lots, so that's the percent participation. And then on top of this, that would be the price advantage compared to the base. Whoops, took off on me. Right here is where I want to be. Okay, the price advantage compared to the base, and you can see that there's a premium or a price advantage. But if you get out here, we're at about, what, $2.45, $1.93 per hundredweight. One thing I do need to mention is the base here changed in 2013. And the reason the base changed is the base used to be unweaned, unvaccinated calves. By 2013, those had basically disappeared from the data. So they're no longer in the data. So essentially all the calves now have some kind of a vaccination program, okay? So the base, starting in 2013, became our VAC24 program. So we're measuring against a little different base as we actually look at that. So you can see what those price effects are, and that would be for VAC34. VAC45, we started out at $2.47 per hundredweight, $4.93 per hundredweight in 2010, and a little more than that actually in 2017. And I'll show you the 2018 numbers in just a few minutes. Let me also mention to you that at the beginning when we were starting to do this, I would call, even a lot of the folks we worked with in Superior were fairly skeptical on what I would call our analysis and our approach to arriving at these price effects. This isn't a community that's necessarily has a lot of expertise in how we do statistical analysis, but I would say over time, the confidence really grew. And I think the confidence in what you're doing and in the approach you're using is really, really important, because ultimately that determines how people accept what you're actually reporting here. So over time, I think that confidence really grew. I'm going to shift just a little bit and just show you the 2018 summer sale data specifically, because that's the most recent information that we actually have. So the number of calves in a lot, this is just descriptive, 104. Base weight of the lots, which is 569 pounds. Average days from auction to delivery, 75 days. And by the way, that number has changed quite a bit since we started doing this. At the very beginning, there was a lot more of, I'll call, selling calves with deliveries in the next, say, 30 to 60 days. Now there's quite a few of these summer calves that are selling that won't be delivered till late fall. In fact, some of those calves won't be delivered till after the first of the year. So there's a little more of a tendency for customers to be using it a bit more as almost a forward contracting tool, as opposed to just a livestock marketing kind of tool. Okay, this is and actually Charly had these pieces of these results that they had extracted from our reports. But VAC45 in 2018 had a $6.19 price per hundredweight advantage over VAC24, and VAC34 had a $3.07 price advantage over VAC24 during that summer sale period of 2018. Just show a little difference on auction date. That's how we account for changes in the market over time. This is gender of the lot. One of the points that I'd actually like to make here as well, $16.70 per hundredweight advantage in steer price. And one of the things we've actually seen over time is that steers relative to heifers, and keep in mind most of these heifers are going to go into commercial feeding as opposed to replacement heifers, the steer price relative to heifers has been expanding. So steers are worth more relative to heifers, and even adjusted for the price effects in the marketplace. We think part of that is due to increased finished weights and increased carcass weights, and the fact that steers have greater flexibility in terms of getting to these higher carcass weights that people are actually trying to pursue. And so we think that's one of the factors that's going on there. They do sell mixed gender lots, so you can put both heifers and steers in the same lot, but there's a $4.55 per hundredweight penalty for selling mixed gender lots. So a mixed gender lot adjusted for the amount of heifers that are in the lot have a pretty significant penalty associated with them. Region, this probably doesn't surprise you. Northern Plains, typically Rocky Mountain, North Central are the highest priced calves. Southeast are typically the lowest priced calves. We actually think most of that is due to trucking distance to point of destination. That's what we think, and I'm going to show you some other evidence for that here in just a few minutes. Breed description of the lot, and I'm going to talk about this a little later, but we've used this breed description since we actually started doing this. So Brahman influenced is our base. English Continental Cross is $6.74 up. English Cross is $7.61 up. At the beginning, this was kind of the limit of our ability to provide any kind of genetic descriptors. And we've moved quite a bit of distance from there, and as I get towards the end of the presentation, I'll talk a little more about how we are currently defining cattle genetically and what we could potentially do to further define feeder cattle genetically. Were the calves implanted? I think Charly talked a little bit about this. We have a paper published on this a few years ago, but in every single year, we have not seen a significant discount in the marketplace associated with having implanted calves, okay? And again, I'll show you some other data on this, but only about 25% of the calves today are implanted. In 1995, about 65% of the calves were implanted. So we've taken calf implants out of most of our cow herd calf implant programs. That's been a fairly big change. This happens to be NHTC, and Charly had this number in, but NHTC, we had a $2.30 price advantage. And we try very hard to stay out of the business of saying, is that enough to pay for participating in the program? We don't really see that as our role. We're trying to provide the analysis here. We're trying to let producers look at that and decide if they think that's a sufficient return for them to participate in a program like that. Okay, there's a GAP program now. Some of you are probably familiar with GAP, driven by Whole Foods. It's a Whole Foods supply program. So the GAP 4s actually have a $3.37 price advantage over no GAP 4s in our analysis. So there is some price advantage associated with that. You can go on Superior's website, or you can go on the Global Animal Partnership website and really dig into the details of that. But this last year is the first year that we actually conducted that analysis. Okay, there is a box in Superior to check if calves have been tested for BVD and are BVD PI free. We've actually seen that to be significant some years, but many years it's not been significant. And let me give you a little interpretation of that. If you look at the Superior system where you're selling truckload-sized lots of calves, and you're actually seeing the calves that are not tested, I would argue in most cases, because they're coming directly off of ranches, are relatively low-risk calves, okay? If we were making this kind of comparison to what I would call put-together calves that are coming from a lot of different sources and are commingled, then I suspect we'd probably see some difference there in that premium. But the base that we're comparing to here, we typically don't see any premium, but Mike, I think we have seen that premium some years. Were the calves handled according to BQA guidelines? Last year, we're pulling this out of the comments. We did not see a price advantage. Some of you might have seen an article that just came out from NCBA, where some of our colleagues at Colorado State looked at this in the Western video and did see some price advantage associated with beef quality assurance participation. We did not see that here in 2018. One reason I put this in is we get a lot of questions about, well, what about the value of these other programs? There's a lot of programs that don't have enough numbers in that we can really actually take a look at. So we can only really study something that has enough lots for us to really be able to legitimately take a good look at that. And I wanted to mention that because there are more programs out there. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. We have a paper published on this topic, but effective growth promoting implants and non-hormone treated cattle, status and sale price of beef calf lots. If you take a look here, this is NHTC price advantages each year from 2010 through 2018. Charlie had this number up, $2.30. That's ranged from actually no or minus 24 cents right here up to $2.30 in 2018. But you do see a lot of growth in the percentage of lots. So we've went from 5.2% of the lots being NHTC lots up to 23.8% of the lots being NHTC lots. So there's been a lot of growth in NHTC in terms of the number of lots that are actually being prepared and offered for sale through Superior. We have the percentage of implanted lots right here, and again, I mentioned this, about 25% is now what we're getting. And if we see any significant differences here, the price advantages are actually in favor of the implanted calves. We're not actually quite sure why that might actually be. We really think there's no price effect on implant status. But I would argue, and I think Charlie was making that argument too, that we have a lot of calves in this industry that are not designated for a natural program that are not being implanted. And I don't quite understand that. It seems to me it would make more sense that in those cases, if you don't have those calves designated or designed for a natural program, it would make sense to me to actually implant those calves. I put this in because one of the things we're trying to do, and we've been looking at some other things as well, but this is actually a rather than putting region in the model, we actually put state in the model. So we're looking at the price effects for a state. So the way to interpret this is our base is down here as Florida, and Florida would be the lowest price calf market in the country. That's what it would actually be. The highest price calf market in the country would be Nebraska. And then if you look at Kansas, South Dakota, Wyoming, Colorado, Montana. And what I think this is primarily a function of is distance from kind of a northwest Kansas, southwest Nebraska kind of centrality, if you will. If you think about this, most of our calves over time are moving from these distant parts of the country, and about 70-some percentage of those calves are going to end up in feedlots kind of here from West Texas, western Kansas, western Nebraska, or central, and maybe here in some of them in Colorado. So if you think about that. Now we have a more recent paper working on that the interpretation would be is the premiums associated with calf health programs are to some degree a function of trucking distance to where they're going. So if cattle are going to be trucked further, there's greater price advantages to the calf health programs. If cattle aren't being trucked very far, they're lower risk calves, and therefore the price advantages for calf health programs are somewhat less. It actually makes sense, and we think we're still working on that, but we're really trying to tease that out of the data. Now, I put a few slides in on a paper that we published last spring, and many of you know David Lallman at Oklahoma State, and David has really been the leader of this project. David has some data sets that he had put together and was really looking at, this is the fundamental question David was asking, is do the phenotypic weaning weight trends track with the genetic trends associated with the breed associations? So we put together, Mike did most of this, our superior data to use with this and really try to take on this question. And I want to show you 2 slides here. This is Southern Plains. This is our Southern Plains data. And the Southern Plains data, the phenotypic trends over time for weight are actually going up. But the weights, I'll show you Northern Plains here in a little bit, but the weights themselves are actually quite a bit lower than our Northern Plains calves. If we go to the Northern Plains, what we see is the weights seem to have pretty good increases back here in the 90s, maybe up to about 2000, 2002, and have actually been fairly flat between those times. These are actually differences between implanted calves and non-implanted calves here, but the phenotypic trends for weaning weights in the north have been pretty flat now for probably, 10, 12 years, something like that. So I guess our interpretation of that is even though you may have the genetics for growth, if you don't have the environment, the nutritional environment that really allows those genetics to be capitalized on, you don't see the growth performance associated with, that you might expect associated with the genetic trends. The last thing that I want to talk a little bit about is where I kind of think we are in the industry today in terms of feeder cattle marketing. The last 20 years or so, I would say the primary emphasis in looking at value-added programs has been in calf health. I think that's where we've had a lot of emphasis. I think we've made some progress, but if you listen to the stories about bovine respiratory disease and death loss in the feedlot, we certainly have a long ways to go. And understanding the factors that are contributing there, I think, is one of the big hurdles that we actually have in front of us. If you go back to really where we started, this is probably the best we could do in any kind of genetic description back in probably 1995, 1996. And that's really where we started with classifying cattle at that point in time. Somewhere in the early 2000s, we got enough data where we would have a sire breed identified that we could start to do a sire breed analysis and look at sire breed effects on calf prices. And so probably somewhere in the early 2000s, what I'd say we probably got there. Over the last probably 5 years, we now have enough sire breed information that we can look at price effects on 3 breeds, Angus, Red Angus, and Charly, and we've actually published some of that data. We do not yet have enough lots that are either Simmental or Simmental Angus sired for us to be able to look at that effect, but we may get enough lots where we're able to really begin to look at that effect as well, but we're not actually quite there at this point in time. But there are, I'll call them further advances here in what I would call feeder cattle genetic programs. And some of you remember a few years back a company called Verified Beef and Reputation Feeders. And we really started to see people put forth, I would call, programs that further define, maybe more precisely define, genetic potential for feedlot performance and carcass merit in feeder cattle, in beef calves and feeder cattle. And that trend now, I think, has actually continued. And you guys have the feeder profit calculator. I think that's clearly, in my view, a move in the right direction as a tool to try to define what calves are actually worth, what they're actually valued at. Our friends at the Angus Association have Angus Link. They have Angus Source. Angus Source is more of an age and source verification program with some other pieces. The Angus Link program is pretty much a genetics program. Our Red Angus colleagues have some programs, but this is where I think the future is in precisely describing the genetic potential of groups of feeder cattle. And I think we're going to see more and more of these kinds of things come along, but I think anytime you can accurately describe and effectively communicate what that value should be, And if you can measure that effect over time, that's what I think it takes to make something sustainable in this industry. So my anticipation is that's what we'll see coming fairly soon in more ways. I do want to take this opportunity, though, to make one other point here, if I can. And actually, Craig mentioned this topic, but I really believe this, and I've talked to Wade about this in some detail, that we are grossly underutilizing heterosis in this industry. And I think there's a variety of reasons for that, but I think part of it is we've typically thought about heterosis, and my animal breeding colleagues, who probably mostly left so they didn't have to listen to me, I suspect, but you know, I think we've always thought of heterosis as a breeding systems issue. And what I would like to argue is I think with our new capabilities of and hopefully fairly inexpensively identifying breed composition of animals on commercial ranches, we can more effectively create and use heterosis on ranches. So I really want to make this point because I personally suspect that some of these health issues we're seeing in feedlot cattle are a function of the fact that we've given up too much heterosis, that we've sacrificed too much heterosis. And so, you know, I would urge your organization, and you guys have been strong proponents of heterosis for a long, long time, but I just think it's a really, really big issue and something that we shouldn't be as neglectful of as I think we have been. So with that, Chip, I'm going to go ahead and close my comments, and I guess we will have some time for a few questions. Thank you very much.
All right. If our panelists would come up here so we could put you front and center. Dr. Odde, I'm going to set this in front of you so Jackie doesn't scold me. Jackie, please make a note. I've never remembered to do that kind of thing ever, and I remembered all three. Just saying. All right. Now, I know it's been a long day, but if those three gentlemen didn't spark some conversations about how we can better help our customers, I'll just be really honest. You're a damn sight better seed stock provider than we are. If all that's like, yeah, we got that, we're good now. So for all of those, for all of you who have all of this handled for your customers, you can go on and leave and go do other stuff. For those of you who think there might be an opportunity here, this is your chance. I can ask questions and will if need be, but I'd much prefer that. Thank you, Mr. Griswold. Let me come to you, John. You've already had to work once and use your voice. You should be able to just sit there and sip your latte, and I walk to you.
I think my question is for Mr. Uden. We've talked a lot all day about how to make more cattle or how to make more pounds, and we've done a great job. The thing that I'm really worried about is my wife and I went to town the other day, and I told him, I'm never giving Burger King another $1. But we were in town the other day, and I said, let's give them $10 more. I want to try one of those Impossible Burgers. We drove in there. We got an Impossible Burger, got my little boy a Junior Whopper. Big sign when you drive in says 100% Whopper, 0% beef. We ate them. I could tell a difference, but there wasn't a big difference. I got 4 little kids, when we get in the car, go, where do you want to go eat lunch? Chick-fil-A. Is anybody worried about our beef market share? I read an article the other day, by 2040, 60% of the beef they think will be plant-based. Being a past president of the NCBA, do you know more about this subject than we do, or I'd take any comments?
I have tried it. We tried it before it really came out, and you can see the difference, but you don't taste as much difference. Now, the problem with the plant-based is the money behind it. We've had plant-based forever. We've had the soy burger, we've had the Boca burger, we've just got there's a big campaign behind it. So social media is how we're really attacking it. So a lot of times you won't see a lot of stuff out front and center back to the producers, but there's a lot of social media out there being conducted by NCBA on the checkoff's behalf. Now it's 24 ingredients, not 22, because I think they added coconut butter for marbling, so, and another coconut product. So when it still has to get through the media police a little bit, but we keep pushing it out there, mainly on social media to the younger crowd, because that's where we get the biggest reach for the biggest bang for the dollar. Talking about 24 ingredients, it's higher in calories. It has less protein. It is highly processed, where beef is not. So it makes it's the #1 topic out there this year, and it is scary. But yet, one reason they're attacking the beef, now they have it in chicken, now they're going to have it in fish too, and everything else. But the one thing that we continue to have a hard traction is as far as producers, we're looking at our sustainability footprint. We're raising, we're not getting a lot of traction on the greenhouse gases, and a lot of this election out there is bringing all this back up too. But that is how they're driving it, is the environmental impact, even though there is no beef is responsible for less than 2% of greenhouse gases. But it is hard to get that traction out to the public. But it is the #1 concern out there throughout the land for the beef cycle. But we're going to have to continue to fight it. We're going to have to continue to push back. I push it out a lot I share it a lot on my Facebook, and push it out there all the time. But it has a taste. It's the closest tasting thing out there that they've ever come up with. So it is a very big concern. I don't know if I answered your question. You got so many dollars, and there are a lot of dollars going to be pushed into that. And we're working with nutritionists as far as the non-health of the plant-based product. It isn't there. I mean, it's highly processed, and a lot of it, they attack us in ag about GMOs, and they turn around and there's some acceptance out there. A lot of it is also, they've got a lot of stock price in it, and they got a lot of big backers in it. Will it replace beef? I think the biggest thing with the beef industry is about 56% of your production is consumed in the form of ground beef. So that continues to be a driver. We have more trouble than anymore, and that's one reason we need exports of moving the middles and the ends than we do the ground beef. So that's where they're going to attack you, is where you're, from a price standpoint, they're still higher than we are too.
And I suspect, as clearly many of you in the room know, and certainly NCBA and their staff and others are watching these things, but we're going to find some strange bedfellows on some of these things, right? Many of you saw just the other day, an exec at Whole Foods essentially comes out bashing that product, and this individual is no fan of beef, but essentially disputes their claims of a healthy product. So this is a person who is no fan of beef, but is bashing that product.
We do. We need to partner with people out there that are closer to the retail sector. McDonald's says they're not going to use it. Wendy's not going to use it. Now, they may ask us to do more things. One thing I didn't talk about today is, there's been a lot of play out there as far as BQA. BQA has become essential from 2 of the plants that we have to be BQA certified. Now we're moving into the sustainability path, and that's going to pay some dividends back over time too. Sustainability, whether you like it or not, if we aren't willing to stand behind our product, we're going to get attacked in many ways. So we have to continue to keep elevating our bar to our producers to stand behind their product, just like if we're going to compete.
Who else has a question? Oh, Riley's coming.
Riley Foster, DNA Services, American Cemetery Association.
Hi, this question is for Mr. Uden. You'd mentioned that you see a lot of issues with the feet and structure of fat cattle. How would you compare it to 15 or 20 years ago?
It's worse.
And I guess
I'm gonna say what I'm seeing. I'm talking as an industry, but I'm not. I see it worse. I don't see it as much in the sim genetics. Matter of fact, that's how I think a lot of these guys can and have corrected any issues I've had. I've got really. I haven't had a lot of. The problem I had with the sim genetics over the years was the straightness. That's pretty well out of them. But these splay-footed cattle, and I'd argue a little bit today. I talked to Bob, I think, and the girls there at break, but I'm a yearling and 2-year-old. I'm not sure you can measure it as much as you can from 2 to 4. And some of these cattle they just break at that ankle, and that foot just splays out, and they're shot. I mean, they're not going to jump. They're not going to travel. You know, they say certain bulls don't want to breed because of, you know, they lay under the trees. I think it's because they don't travel very well. So
I guess a comment I would have, and maybe get your reaction, that was at the same time frame, say 15 years, it's gotten worse at the time when we've taken our choice in prime cattle from 55% to 80%, I think you said. And I'm not saying that high grading cattle, you know, are bad footed. I'm just thinking that when we accelerated our high marbling cattle, we just ignored other traits completely to get there.
Guaranteed, we've spent a lot of money getting them to 80% choice in prime, and there's been a little bit of, maybe the pendulums went too far one way. We need to bring it back. We don't want to give up the 80% choice in prime. We want to keep working on that, sure. But there's a point of no return. Okay, Dr. Odde was just talking about we're flatlining on this on fertility, and we're flatlining on weaning weight. I mean, how much are we spending to try to keep increasing? Or are we spending it in the right spot? Should it be more focused on management through nutrition and trace minerals and addressing the animal's needs on a timely basis? Whether, you know, sometimes one thing that drives me nuts in the world is low-cost producer. I want to say optimum, you know, be an optimum more than just low cost, because low cost can be a disaster.
Riley's got us a question in the back.
Yeah, I'm a little frustrated with the lack of knowledge in the cattle buyers. I was at the sale barn a couple weeks ago, and I just got my carcass data. So I just told them they paid a premium of $55.6 per head, $55.62. They grade 4 pounds a day. They yielded 65% cutout, and everything they bought went through. And I said, these are Simmental cattle. The next person in sold stuff with IGS. You know, the buyers just laugh. They don't understand. You're doing all this work. You're trying to do what's right. And when you got a small group of cattle, you're not going to, you know, I don't want to take a few fall ones to Superior. I mean, how can we educate the buyers?
Social media. That's the answer to everything else, right? No, we got to get in front. We got to get in front of them, and we got to get out in front of them, and that's what I say. It takes 3 to 5 years. I mean, Vitafirm's got their progressive nutrition program that's on Superior that's got a logo now, and they're on their 4th, 5th year, and they're just now starting to see a little bit of buyers starting to understand it and starting to see what Amifern's actually doing in their product. It's going to be the same way with FPC. Them buyers are going to have to be educated, and we're going to have to get in front of them, and to do that, you've got to get the professional market guy to get a hold of them and say, look, this is what happens. Right now, like you said, I think if you went to the average sale barn or went to anywhere and you said these cattle are this, 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 and this, they don't know. You're 100% right. They don't know. We're going to have to do a better job completely of knowing what that next step is to make it better for everybody.
I'd just follow up real quick on that comment because I'm going to steal something Craig said from just a few moments ago. But before I say that, to your comment there, absolutely, there are going to be a lot of sale facilities are clueless about these things. Couple things. One, help us chum the water. If you have a local facility, let us take that burden on, okay? Don't go there and surprise them and say, hey, I got this little thing. It says I'm packing gold in the back of that trailer. Hook me up. Get me in touch with them ahead of time. And I'll just be frank with you. If your sale facility that you typically go to doesn't have the gumption to do that, why in the hell are you going to them? Perfect example. I was talking to Dr. Weber in the back. Farmers and Ranchers in Salina. Phenomenal job. John, am I right? Andrew's team over there, you pack, say that again? Okay, so you need to be, so we still got to be out in front of them, right? We can have, there are a number of cattle that have sold for a significant premium through that particular facility. But still, to Charlie's point, because it's such a new product, we have to continue to remind them for a little while. So with that said, but here's the other piece, and it's something we do see somewhat frequently with this, and I think Craig's comment from earlier is exactly right. If you have the right folks and the right learning, he said, I will overpay for the right cattle. So there's a burden for a number of us to help educate our sale facilities. That's our job as well as your job. But I do think when we can do some of that and we can get our marketers helping us in the middle and expose more to the feedlots, maybe we can realize Craig's comment there, he'll overpay for us.
Well, and on top of that, unfortunately, the smaller producer takes the less price. I mean, if you're hauling in 10 or 30 versus the guy with a load lot or the guy that's got more cattle or whatever else, that's just how it is. And to get on top of that and to get in front of that and to be proactive, you're gonna have to get in front of them buyers and let them know that you got them and they'll want them.
And I think it's a timeout deal a little bit too. We're seeing in the packing plants today, they're getting rid of some of their old baggage, I might say, and some of their guys that wanted to buy them the same way they've been buying them for 40 years. And they're bringing in newer people to understand the premiums and discounts and what they need to be buying. Because tell you what, today we are in the beef industry. We're not in the cow calf or the feeder industry. We're in the beef industry because packing plants today are driven by the sales force, not the buying force. Okay? So they got an idea when they come in what they're going to move and how much they're going to move and where they're going to move, and then the order goes down and the buyer is the tail, not the nose anymore. And we got the same problem though. We're selling beef to the packer and getting a premium, but yet we're trying to use old technology or some of my old buyers that, yeah, they did pretty well, but they don't really, it's kind of like they've had 2 rounds of shots and they're good. They really can't define it. So as we see more young order buyers out there or agents or reps that understand, there's a lot of reps I won't deal with as Superior, sorry. Check them off. I mean, if they don't have what I want in mind to get me to my end result, I'm not going to use them. I'm in the same process, whether I get them in the sale barn or out in the country, because it's up to me right now to track your cattle. So if I know they did well, I'll call them and say, hey, I want to be looking at these cattle. And the order buyer will look you in the eye and why? I want those cattle. I mean, we're trying to do 21st century business in 1900 mentality in some of our aspects yet. The industry's a big thing, and it takes a long time to turn that ship.
I have a question and a comment. I want to start with Dr. Odde with this question. But what I hear you guys saying is that data makes a difference, and that people are willing to pay for the cattle that have better value. My question is, we tend to talk in traits or in EPDs. Are there some traits where we've gone, you mentioned a while ago, from 55% choice or better to 80% choice or better? Are there some traits that we have selected for as seed stock producers through the years where we may be reaching a point of diminishing return? And if so, what are those?
If you're asking me, I suspect the answer is yes. I guess one way I would actually make that argument is that if you see, and I'll use maybe health as the example, okay? If you see health and more health-related problems, that would suggest to me that we've made changes either in our genetics or our management that results in that, okay? So it doesn't seem to me there's really any other argument for how that was actually created. So if we're having more feedlot death loss, it's got to be due to something, and my suspicion is there's a genetic component there. If it may be a genetic correlation that we've yet to discover or yet to understand. But if we see it phenotypically, then I suspect there's something there. And I don't think that should surprise us a whole lot. You know, there's all kinds of antagonisms in genetic relationships, so that to think that we make progress in one direction and we might perhaps slip a little somewhere else, I don't think should surprise us a whole lot. I think that's almost to be expected.
I do think we've concentrated on growth and marbling awful hard. We've got the marbling, we got the growth, but are we managing that milk production and what that animal needs to fulfill what the genetic EPD says it's gonna do? And whether we like it or not, you know, in the feedlot setting, we assume everything comes in pretty much normal. Okay, I'd love to individually manage 50,000 head, but that's not doable. But I think we want fast growth, and we want it all. And I do think that we've charged up that engine awful hard without changing a different kind of oil in the system or different type of gas. We're still trying to, you know, run like we always have. We're slow to adapt, so
I guess, Donald, I'd offer maybe one more thought. My suspicion is, and again, this is purely speculation, that we've actually sacrificed some longevity in our industry. And we've had measures like stability for a long time, but if you really look at stability's contribution to longevity, I would argue it's relatively weak. If you really think about the desire for us to have a cow that has a calf every year till she's 10, 11, 12 years of age, I don't think that's unreasonable. That's a huge economic impact for a cow-calf producer. So I would argue that we desperately need better ways of getting at the longevity kind of issue. So that's one I would probably offer as well.
Dr. Odde, and also Craig as well. Dr. Odde, I fully agree with you about the expression of the fact that we have sacrificed heterosis over the years. There's not much doubt about that. And I've spent a lot of time in the swine industry, and we don't do that. In the swine industry, everything is crossbred if you're going to make money. We simply cannot sacrifice hybrid vigor the way we've done that in the cattle industry. So how do we quantify it? Those of us in education, when we talk about the advantages of hybrid vigor, we go through all these things we have data about, and we get down to talking about health, and we say, yes, surely there is an advantage, but we don't have good data. So can you address that a little bit?
Well, I'm in the middle of lots of conversations about that. So the question, I think you all got it, but really the question is, outside of the fact that, you know, the way we typically talk about heterosis is it's the breeding systems we put in place, or using composite breeds, or those kinds of things. But part of what I think we need to do, we now have tools to actually get at breed composition. We have ways of measuring heterozygosity. And I think we have ways of going into commercial feed yards and actually looking at the getting at the heterosis question through breed composition or perhaps heterozygosity, and really determining whether that really is a significant factor in, for example, health in the feedlot. I think we actually have ways of actually doing that, and I would argue that that's a very, very important question.
I guess I'm pretty blunt, and I try to show them the data. You know, if they won't get off the straight bred wagon very easy, I started showing them some data of cattle that do have the heterosis. The biggest challenge we see is when we have the heterosis, not only are we getting the performance, we have a little better health. We have a little more growth, a little more pop, a little more efficiency. But when they get to the carcass, particularly with $24 choice select spread, you can really ring some bells today by taking a lot of 4s and 5s out of there. And so if we got a multi-generational ranch system we're working with, you target the young ones that are entering in, and that, we've seen quite a few people starting to switch. And there's no reason they can't, because there's a lot of people out there, whether you guys like it or not, these quarter blood bulls, there's an introduction there to where dad or grandpa won't quite, he'll say, well, it's only a quarter, I'll get it started. And that's maybe all you need to get it started. Where it used to be, we're going to go 50-50 on day one. That's what scared them, because they didn't know how to manage that. But they can introduce and then work into it today. We got a lot more tools and a lot more predictability, but about one turn and they can see some of the benefits that they've had. But it is a slow process. And it's the people that want to feed their cattle or retain them a farther part of the chain, whether it's I don't know if these guys could tell you, but I see a lot of heterosis calves that are on the VAC 45 because they see that added growth that they get and maybe a little more efficient. But I don't know if they can separate that or not.
So one other comment I would make, maybe Gordon and Craig, is that the heterosis benefits to the cow-calf producer are well-defined and substantial, okay? And more so than to, Craig feeding cattle. Those are huge effects that are pretty well documented, pretty well defined. And so that to me is big, but let me tell you one of the things that I think works against that, okay? This is an observation I've made. If you look at my home county in South Dakota where we have our ranch, and I'm ballparking these numbers, but I think there's roughly 5,000 cows in that county, beef cows. And 20 years ago, those 5,000 cows were probably there, and they probably had 50 owners, okay? Spread over 50 owners. Today, there's 10 owners for those 5,000 cows, okay? And those owners mostly haven't bought all the land. What they're doing is just leasing land and leasing pasture. So most of that growth has actually been through leases. But what that rancher then has, and we actually have this in our branch, we have about 500 cows, and right now we'd have cows probably in 7 different pastures. And that also means we have 7 different kinds of deals, okay? Some of them are pure pasture leases. Some of them are we run cows with another individual who's running bulls. And so there's a lot of complexity associated with growing in these kind of leasing environments. And so and you're weighing the economics of your breeding program against the economics of your feed costs, including pasture costs. So it doesn't always lend itself to maybe an ideal kind of crossbreeding program. And you're weighing these differences. But I think the cow-calf sector's changed a lot just in the last 10 or 15 years. We have, a lot more people now that 20 years ago, a 500 cow place was a really big place. Now that's average, in fact, probably even a little below average in lots of places.
I'd follow up, and then we got one last question, and then we have somebody who'd like to talk to you all, and that isn't me. But one comment, it goes back to a different tool, and that's the profit calculator relative to heterosis. The team that works with that profit calculator, and some of you have heard me say this, the coolest piece about that, beyond clearly the marketing aspects, the opportunity for folks to make more money at certain times, is the fact there are a lot of folks who are straight breeding, and we have so many wonderful conversations that come out of, they get a certificate. It shows what we know is going to happen over time if you straight breed exclusively. They ask the question. It gives your team an opportunity to open the door, open the window. Countless really cool examples of that. And so if you want to know about how that really happens, we'll talk about that later. One final question. I'm going to ask you to keep our responses reasonably brief on this one. Fire away.
Chip, I'm sorry, it's not really a question, it's kind of a comment. The lady that just had a few calves to sell, could you ask her how many? Yep. Or a small amount? 20, 30?
And if you heard that, she said there were, I think, 16. Did I hear that right?
16.
60, topped the market, felt pretty good. It was maybe the lack of the Simmental awareness a little bit.
Why can't she feed them herself? We do that. We personally do that with our calls. Our county does a blow and show, very small county in southeast Colorado. They do a blow and show deal, and we do our carcass contest through U.S. Premium Beef. And we sell our culls, we fill that truck. And the Superior people and the sale barn people probably really don't like to hear it, but we take the middleman out, and we sold our calves Monday with the 4-H calves, and 100% choice or better, 40% of them were prime, only had 1 4, so it really works good. And it can be done. I think it can be done.
And unfortunately, we are out of time, but I would encourage you to do the following, because that brings up a great point. The reality is the profit calculator and other tools like that and other wisdom that you have helps you identify value. For some of you, or maybe more importantly, for some of you, your customers are in a position where they should consider, should they feed some cattle? Probably the initial step of that is, I don't even know how to do that, right? And so we're not going to solve all that right now, but you're fortunate you have a couple really great resources in the room that can maybe help you kind of think about that initial step. I'd encourage you to corner them when you get that opportunity. With that said, yeah, absolutely, you have a microphone. Of course you can.
No.
No, you didn't. No, you're good.
Am I all right? Okay. Low cattle prices make people think outside the box. That's what changes the industry. It's never changed on high times. It's changed on low times.
Amen. With that said, would you thank our panel for me, please? I'd stay seated. I think you'll appreciate the fact that you did. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Chip. As I attend meetings or conferences across the country, oftentimes the topic of college football comes up, and numerous times I've heard people say, you have a great football coach at Kansas State. And he recently retired, and I thought it would be good if you heard some of his philosophy, some of his history. when he was hired in November of 1988, the record for the 3 preceding years were 0, 26, and 1. Okay. 9 years later, when he took over coaching in '89 then, 9 years later, Kansas State football was ranked #1 in the nation. And numerous people have stated that this is probably the greatest turnaround in college football history. And I think a lot of people would agree with that. Coach Snyder coached for 27 years, and he did it with class and dignity. He was Conference Coach of the Year 7 times, National Coach of the Year 5 times. Former football coach Barry Switzer at Oklahoma said Coach Snyder should not have been Coach of the Year, he should have been Coach of the Century. So he had a great deal of respect for Coach Snyder. In 2012, Kansas State played the University of Oklahoma for the Big 12 championship. There were numerous sports writers that were stating that probably that Oklahoma football team was one of the greatest football teams of all time. Kansas State won that game handily because we think that they were outcoached and that perhaps Oklahoma came into the game a little overconfident. The graduation rate of the football players under Coach Snyder typically exceeded the graduation rate of the all-university students. In 2015, he was named into the Football Hall of Fame, one of only 4 coaches inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame while he was actively coaching. Okay? I would say that few people in the history of Kansas State University have had such a positive impact on the university and Manhattan as Coach Snyder. He is now serving in a special role as an ambassador for K-State. And the Manhattan Mercury, our local newspaper, published a special issue about Coach Snyder, 25 pages, 100% devoted to Coach Snyder. Okay? And Coach Snyder is a teacher. Okay? He has published a book called Take It From Me. I thought that you would enjoy hearing from Coach Snyder. So, Coach Snyder, we're very pleased to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. If at any time you can't hear, just raise your hand, let me know, and I'll try to alter how I'm doing this. And again, I thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I truly do. I appreciate what you do. And there's a variety of different arenas that you're in. I understand that, but the basis of it is what the state of Kansas and the Midwest is really all about. And what you have done for our state, our nation, and for that matter, the world, is beyond reproach and is truly very, very special. And our world doesn't function as we would like for it to without you. So we truly are blessed that you invest yourselves in what you do. Thank you very much. I hope I haven't thrown things off too much. I originally was scheduled to speak to you at, I think, noon or 12:30, and I had to attend a funeral in Lawrence, Kansas. And those of you who follow athletics in the state probably remember Max Falkenstein. Max was the voice of the University of Kansas radio. Splendid individual, passed away at the age of, I think, 92 93, 94 years old, was a good friend, and I wanted to have the opportunity to be at the services for him, and so that's why we've got to change. So I appreciate you bearing with me, and thank you for adjusting your schedule for me. Just very quickly with my history, and then maybe as was indicated, I'll address it a little bit about our approach with young people as it relates to their lives, not necessarily football. It wouldn't be any different if I were in some other venue, some other line of business, but it falls in line with football quite well. But I was born and raised not too far away from here in St. Joseph, Missouri. I was raised by a single-parent mother. I was the only child. We lived in downtown St. Joseph, Missouri. Those of you who have been there, my mother worked. She was employed at Townsend, Wyatt & Wall, which is a prominent department store there. She was a clerk and then became a buyer. We lived in downtown St. Joseph so that my mother could walk to work every morning. My mother didn't drive an automobile, couldn't afford one, never had a driver's license in her life. We lived in a one-room apartment. And when I say one room, I'm not saying one bedroom, I'm talking one room. It was all, everything that we had was in one room. My bed was a Murphy bed that came out of the wall. My mother's bed was a cot that was on the landing outside of the apartment door that I would pull in every night and put down for her. My mother was a major influence in my life. She's the strongest individual that I've ever known. She was 4'9" tall. She never weighed 100 pounds in her life, and yet when she said, "Don't you go out that door," I didn't go out that door. She was an amazing influence on my life, sometimes maybe not as rapidly as it should have been, but nevertheless an amazing, amazing woman. I went from St. Joseph, Missouri to the University of Missouri. When that came about, I was always interested in athletics. I love playing sports. My mother invested me in virtually every sport one could play so that my time was occupied, because she, as I said, worked long and hard hours. She worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and being an only child and having what might be considered time on your hands, she wanted to make sure that I was invested in things that would be meaningful in my life and really kind of keep me busy and keep my hands moving in the right direction. She got me invested in the YMCA, and the YMCA was an opportunity for me to be involved again in athletics, and I've loved to do that. So I participated in everything. It was football, basketball, baseball, track. I was a swimmer. I did all of it. I went to the YMCA when I was in grade school every single day. My mother went down to the YMCA and gathered all the people that would have had any oversight over me and said, "If this young man is late, you call me. If he doesn't show up, you call me, and I will find him, and he will be there." And she meant every single word of it. She didn't want me on the street, so to speak. And consequently, she had a lot of people that supported her, and consequently, I didn't get on the streets, and I was very blessed and fortunate that didn't happen. When I finished high school, I wanted to go to college, and I wanted to participate in athletics. I wanted to play football. I had just grown up with the idea that since I participated in all types of sports, that my future would simply be I would be a teacher and a coach. I never thought about college athletics. I thought about teaching at the high school level and coaching at the high school level. So when I graduated from high school, I wanted to go to the University of Missouri. I wasn't good enough to have a scholarship, so I walked on. My mother had put away all of her hard-earned money in order to be able to pay my tuition at the University of Missouri. The first semester that I was there, I went out for the football team. Don Furrow was the head football coach at the time. At that time, they had freshman football teams, which they don't have now, but they had freshman and varsity, kind of like in a high school. And they have an awful lot of players in the program. I was the 8th team quarterback on the freshman team. So that sent a message to me rather quickly, and I realized that I've had a long, long ways to go. And consequently, I didn't do very well in the classroom either, and at the end of the semester, I chose to go back to St. Joe because I felt guilty about wasting my mother's money. She was trying to pay for my education, and I wasn't getting an education. So I went back to St. Joe, and I vowed at that time that I would never again. I wanted to finish college, but I vowed that I would never put the onus on my mother to pay my way. So I went to a community college in St. Joseph. It's now a 4-year school, but it was a 2-year school at the time, and I finished the second semester and lived at home. So it was did not cost us anything. At the end of that semester at the community college, a fellow by the name of, who became a mentor in my life, a fellow by the name of Dr. Norris Patterson, was the athletic director and head football coach at William Jewell College in Liberty, Missouri. And he came to see me and asked me if I would come and participate in football at William Jewell College. And I told Dr. Patterson I would love to, but I know you're not a scholarship school, and I can't afford to go. If I were to do that, I would have to have employment. I would have to find a job someplace, and I will certainly try to do that and see if I can find a job or several jobs that would pay me enough to pay my tuition, room and board, etc. Dr. Patterson found positions for me, or not positions, but jobs. At the end of the day, I did go to William Jewell College. I did work several jobs during my time there. I'd worked 2 and 3 jobs at the same time, paid my own way. My mother didn't have to pay anything at all. I finished my education at William Jewell in a total of 4 years of college. And after my graduation, Dr. Patterson, who, as I said, became a mentor to me and gave me great guidance in my life, and he directed me to Gallatin, Missouri, not too far away from St. Joe, and small community. I was able to go there, teach, and coach. And I coached football and basketball and women's basketball, in fact, and track, and taught, if you can believe this, taught Spanish. Now, Gallatin School District is all in one building. There are 100 students. At that time, there were 100 students between grades kindergarten through the 12th grade, all in the same building. The classes that I had, I believe I had 4 classes. I think the largest class had 7 students in it, and then 5, and then 2 with 4. And unfortunately, they were all very good students, and since the classes were so small, they were really invested in the classes, and I knew hardly anything about Spanish. So consequently, I had to stay up all night, every night, trying to study to stay one step ahead. And it was kind of interesting. I lived right across the street from the school. I stayed in leased a room from a wonderful lady. I remember her name, Sarah Witt. Mrs. Witt had moved into Gallatin from a farm. She and her husband had lived on a farm all of her life, and her husband passed away, so she moved in to move off of the farm. She was an amazing cook. And every single night when I come home, she had a dining room table that was about the size of 2 of these put together. And every night that table would be absolutely full of delicious food that she would fix. And I'm not a big eater, but I didn't want to embarrass her by not eating her food, so I ate everything that she put in front of me. I gained 40 pounds the year that I was at Gallatin. But and my system is such that if I eat, I want to go to sleep right now. You know, those of you that followed us know my eating habits have not been good. I always eat one meal a day, normally about midnight when I would come home, and it would put me to sleep right away. If I were to eat during the course of the day, I'd get drowsy and want to fall asleep. Well, she fed me so well, and I would always want to fall asleep, but I'd stay up and study that Spanish, so I'd be at least somewhat competent in the classroom the next day. So it was a real challenge for me. And after the first year, you know, I said, I really don't want to do this again. Dr. Patterson got me a graduate assistantship at Eastern New Mexico University in Portales, New Mexico. And I went there, I did my master's degree work, and helped with the football program. Graduated in the year that I was there, 2 semesters. Then I had to go back on the market and get a job again. I applied at a number of different places, and I was offered a position at Indio High School in Indio, California. It's in the Coachella Valley, close to Palm Desert and Palm Springs. I'd never been to California in my life, so I didn't know anything about it. They hired me sight unseen, just off of my resume. So I went to Indio, drove out there, found an apartment, went to the very first meeting. So it was a staff meeting, all the teachers and et cetera, and the principal led the meeting, and the following day would be the first day of school. So after the meeting, the principal pulled me aside and said, Coach Snyder, I've got a favor to ask of you. We have a lady teacher here who is with child and will be unable to teach this first semester. Would you take one of her classes, just one, this semester until she's able to get back, and I'll distribute them among other teachers as well? And I said, sure, I'd be more than happy to. And he said, well, you think about it, and tomorrow you let me know if that's something you want to do. And I said, well, sure, I'll do that. And I said, what's the class, by the way? Spanish. Well, and now, again, I had never been to California, and I was clueless as to what the Coachella Valley was really all about. So I go home and think, well, you know, that's fine. What are my options? You know, I can say no and probably get fired, or I can fight my way through this. I've met the challenge one time before. I'll try to do it again. So I went to class, got there ahead of schedule, and waited. And it was one of those first day of classes where everybody comes for about 15 minutes. You get to introduce to each other, and then you go to the next class, et cetera. So it's, you know, maybe a couple hours total with all the classes, and the next day it starts for real. So as the students started coming in, my jaw drops. And I realized all of a sudden that I am in bigger trouble than I really anticipated. The long and the short of it is I had, I think, 36 or 37 students in the class. Five of them spoke English. So in Coachella Valley, these were all young students that had come across the border with their parents, work the fields, go to school in that system. And several of them most of them could not speak English. So I was meaning they were very proficient at speaking their language, which I am trying to teach them. That doesn't work. So I went home, and I was in a state of panic, and I didn't know what to do. So I tried to figure out a plan. Again, long and the short of it, I went back to class the next day, and I had tables arranged. I went early and arranged the tables, and I think I had 5 tables. And at each table, I put one English-speaking student and the rest, 5 or 6 Spanish-speaking students. And I had worked out a paragraph of instruction that I was able to write on the board in Spanish. That took me about an hour to do that, but nevertheless, I got it. So to the English-speaking students, I explained in English, and to the Spanish-speaking students, I tried to get them to invest in what was on the board. And basically, They taught each other, and I monitored during the entire school year. And that was the last time in my career that I had to teach Spanish. I went from Indio High School. I was there for 2 or 3 years, and I had a good friend. I don't know if you've ever been to Indio, California, but there's an infamous hotel there by the name of the El Moroccan Hotel. A very, like I said, famous hotel, you know, in that part of the country. The fellow that owned it was a gentleman by the name of John Peters, and at Indio, I had also coached the swimming team as well as several other sports. And John's son was in the age group swimming program that I had, and he was, I think Johnny was 9 years old, something like that. So we became good friends. Well, he was a University of Southern California graduate. He was a member of the Cardinal and Gold Club, and he was a good friend with John McKay, who was a head football, very famous individual, very famous in his profession. He was a football coach there at the time. So he convinced John McKay that I should go to USC and begin work on my doctorate degree and work in the football program. And Coach McKay consented to do so, and so I went to USC, started work on my doctorate degree, and worked with the football program. And I helped coach the freshman team. Coach McKay had no clue who I was, really. He used to call me, "Hey, you," and that was, you know, as close as he ever came to knowing what my name was. But I learned a great deal from him, and I enjoyed my time there. But it was quick, and I was there for 1 semester, and then Indio High School called and offered me the head football coaching job because the coach that I worked with there was retiring. So I went back and coached a couple of years at Indio as the head football coach in the football program, also as head swimming coach, and I enjoyed that a great deal as well. I went from there to Santa Ana, California, to Foothill High School, did the same thing, coached, didn't have to teach Spanish. My Spanish speaking or Spanish teaching days were over. So I was there for about 3 years, and then I went to I would say Sherman, Texas, to coach at Austin College. And I really enjoyed that. A friend of mine who I had gone to school with at William Jewell College was coaching there as an assistant coach, and I went with him. He invited me. He wasn't the head coach, but he got the head coach to invite me. So I went to Austin College. I was there for 2 or 3 years. I was a swimming coach and an assistant football coach. Then Hayden Fry, you've heard that name, and Hayden had been at SMU. He went to North Texas State University in Denton. Got a hold of my name somehow. I don't know. I went over, interviewed. He hired me at North Texas. I was there for 3 years at North Texas, and then he was offered the job at the University of Iowa, and I went with him to the University of Iowa. We were at the University of Iowa. He was there for much longer, but after 10 years, I came to Kansas State. And it was interesting how that all took place because, you know, there was a lot of movement in my career, you know, earlier. And I was always trying to get to the next place. You know, I was not very good at being where you are, which I think is significant. So consequently, I wasn't really, you know, very good at what my profession was because I was always trying to get myself to a higher level. And when I got to the University of Iowa, you know, I realized, you know, this is it. I'm not going to move anymore. I'm going to stay right here, and so I can do a better job at what my career field is truly all about. And I enjoyed Iowa, and so, you know, after I'd been there for 10 years, I got a call from a gentleman who was the athletic director at the time from the University of Kansas, and his name is Steve Miller. Those of you that know anything about Kansas State might remember Steve. Goes back some years. He has since left, has become an executive with Nike Corporation, highly successful individual. But Steve called and said, you know, we'd like for you to come and visit our campus and interview for the head football position at Kansas State University. And we still had 3 or 4 games remaining at the University of Iowa, and I said, Mr. Miller, I can't do that because I don't want to be disruptive to our program and here at the University of Iowa. So, thank you, but I really can't do it. Next day came, and he called me back, and he said, we'd really love to have you come and interview for this job. We will wait until your season is over. And I said, Steve, it doesn't make any difference, but it would be detrimental to you if indeed we waited that long and then I didn't, if I were offered the job and I chose not to come, then you wasted all that time. Plus, whether I did or didn't, you would have wasted all that time and you would have had the opportunity or passed up the opportunity to hire somebody who's probably far more proficient than I am. So we left it at that. 2 days later, it's a Sunday evening, and I am at home, and the door, somebody's knocking at the door. So I answer the door, and there's 2 gentlemen there, and I don't know who they are, and they come in. I invite them in. They introduce themselves, and one of them is Steve Miller. And he said, Coach, he said, I just felt like we had to come and see you. We want to make a different proposal, and the different proposal is you have the job. If you'll take the job, you have the job. You don't have to come and interview. And I said, we still have some time in our season. I really can't do it sight unseen. And again, I don't encourage you to wait. He said, Coach, he said, do you have 2 spare bedrooms here in your home? And I said, no, why do you ask? And he said, well, we're going to stay because we're not leaving until you accept the job. Steve was that, and that's the way Steve was. So anyway, they left, and I said no, but I will think about it. And so I called him back in a couple of days, and I said, I will come at the end of the season. Please understand, I'm making no promises, no guarantees. But I will come and visit with your people. So long and the short of it was, season was over. 28th or so of December. I come to Manhattan. We meet over in Bramlage, if you know where that is, up in the a room up in the basketball arena. Nice facility, had just been built. And there's President Weefald and Steve Miller, the athletic director, and a bunch of other personnel in the athletic department. There are professors off of the campus, et cetera, students, a lot of people. And so everybody's sharing ideas and information about Kansas State University with me, and they're all very nice, very gracious, and the things that they're saying are very enticing. So I said to Dr. Weefald, the president, I said, Dr. Weefald, would you have someone take me out on the campus and come back and let me off and then come back and pick me up in an hour's period of time? And Dr. Weefald said, why do you want to do that? I said, I've never been on your campus. I'd like to go on your campus. So nevertheless, they did. A young lady took me on the campus, let me off. I was somewhere in the middle of the campus at the time, and it's cold out now. Like I said, it's 28th December, thereabouts, and it's cold. There's snow on the ground. And I stopped people that were coming by, going from one building to the next, and I talked to maybe 60, 65 people. There were professors on the campus, instructors. There were people that worked on the campus. There were administrators. There were visitors. There were some students. A variety of different types of ladies and gentlemen that were on the campus. And they didn't know me. They didn't know who I was. They didn't know why I was there. I knew none of them. But I asked questions, and I asked about the community. I asked about the university. I asked about the faculty, about the teachers, about the athletic program, and anything and everything that I could think of that was of interest to me. after an hour's period of time, a young lady came, picked me up, took me back to Bramlage, and I said to Dr. Weep all the time, I said, I need to spend some time with my family to talk about this, but I am very interested. And he said, what changed your mind? And I said, you know, the people. And I told him how impressed I was with all of the people that I spent time visiting with. They were open, they were honest. Nobody got in a hurry, you know, and it was cold out there, and there wasn't anybody saying, excuse me, I need to get inside, you know, et cetera. And everybody took all the time that I asked for, and as I said, was very, very gracious. And they were, it was genuine. You know, the people that were in Bramlage, I think they were genuine too, but I didn't know that. You know, they were trying to share with me things that would help influence my decision to come. The other people, they had no idea why I was there. So I realized that it was real, and the people were real. And I've said countless times, you know, we came to Kansas State University because of the people. We stayed because of the people. Retired 10 years ago, whatever it was, and we stayed in Manhattan because of the people. And when we came back and started coaching again, it wasn't about football, it was about the people. And it's always remained that. You know, it is truly a special, special place. You know, you're from all over, but I know, you know, many of you are Western Kansas people, and I've spent an awful lot of time out there as well. And it's as genuine as it gets, you know, any place. And I've been in a lot of places across the country. So that has been truly, truly significant in my life. You know, when it was mentioned a moment ago, the first day that I was on campus as the football coach, I had called for a meeting with all the players, and it was amazing when they all showed up. It was school was in session, and it was after class, and they all that were in the program showed up. And as I counted, we had 47 players that were on scholarship. That was at a period of time when you could have 95 on scholarship. We were the smallest scholarship unit in the history of college football. And then, as was indicated a moment ago, I did some research. We were the Kansas State University at that time, unbeknownst to me until I had already gotten here. It was the losingest program in the history of college football. It was the only program that had lost in excess of 500 games in its history. And I got to coach it. The first meeting we had, it was just, I remembered as though it was yesterday. And I told all of the youngsters I had to catch a plane, and I was going to go do one of those catbacker functions with booster organizations, you know, around the state. And I told all the youngsters that were there, I said, you know, this isn't about football. You know, I just want to get to know you. I want to share a little bit about me and what my history is, and I want to hear from you. And when I opened the floor up for them to talk, it was amazing. First young guy got up, and he said, Coach, he said, you were outside, it's cold, right? I said, yes. He said, you look around. He said, we all have jackets on because it's cold out. He said, you don't see a letter jacket. He said, we all have letter jackets, but we're all too embarrassed to wear them. Second young guy got up and he said, Coach, he said, you don't know anything about the community yet. And he said, there's an area here called Aggieville. He said, you don't know anything about Aggieville, but it's a place where all the students go and have a good time. And he said, Coach, he said, we don't go. He said, none of the players go. He said, we don't go because we're too embarrassed. Third young guy got up and he said, Coach, he said, you look around the room, he said, very few, if any of us, go to class on Monday after a ball game. and said the same thing, said we're too embarrassed to do so. Another young guy got up and he said, Coach, he said, and very few of us go on Tuesday either. And they were dead serious about it. So the dialogue went on, but I left, went out, got on a plane, and I couldn't get that off my mind. And as soon as I landed, I called someone back here that worked in the office and asked them to initiate a review or a study of the grade point averages of all the young people in our program each and every semester from the day they arrived until that moment. Well, a couple of weeks later, when we got all that information in, what I realized is that every single individual in that room, their grade point average had gone consistently down from the day they entered Kansas State University until that point in time. And the point being that I heard from them when they got up and talked about how the failures that they had impacted their personal and social lives. And now I was understanding how it had impacted their educational life as well, which, basically says, success breeds success. And failure does exactly the same thing, breeds failure. And it did for each and every one of them. The very first year, I took our players one day before the season started. That first year, I took them out on the field, and I had the scoreboard turned on. And I said, look at the scoreboard. I want your attention on the scoreboard. And I said, I want you to realize something. I will not assess you or this team based on what's on the scoreboard at any time during the course of this season. I said, I will assess you and our program based on your efforts to become better in all facets of your life every single day. At the end of the season, we had won one ball game and lost, I think we were playing 10-game seasons then, or 11-game seasons maybe, 1-10. Now, every person that I know that I had befriended in the profession called me and said, you had better leave now or you'll be selling insurance in a few months. And I said, and I made the statement publicly, I had never been more convinced at the end of the season that Kansas State University could have a successful football program. And I shared with our players, and I shared with anybody that would listen, and the reason was not what was on the scoreboard. The reason was because the young people in our program did make that effort to become better day in and day out through the course of the season. At the end of the season, I knew we were a far better, collectively, a far better football team, but I also knew that individually, each one of those young people were better people. I had always asked for their priorities to be their faith, their family, to be the best person, to be the best student, to be the best football athlete they could be, and to find ways every single day of their life to become a little bit better in those areas. And they made the effort to do exactly that. Second year, they won 5 games, then they won 7, then they won 9, then they won 10, then they won 11, 6 out of the next 7 years. And it was so perfect that way because what it did was demonstrate the positive results that come from gradual, daily, constant improvement, a little bit better. So they were getting a little bit better every day. We were getting a little bit better every year, and it proved so in terms of the record. My engagement with the young people that are in our program, was truly about what I just mentioned. I always shared with them, number one, that I thought it was most important that they learn how to and practice engaging people in their lives who genuinely cared about them and people who wanted to, could, and would make their lives better. And I had experienced it in my life, and it started off with my mother. She made my life better. She cared. My grandfather served the same role. People that each and every day of my life I reached out to find, teachers that I had, neighbors that I had, people in the church that I had, but every single day, and to this day, I'm 100 years old, but every single day, I still look for those people that I can embrace in my life, people that want to make and can make my life better. And I tried to promote that with young people in our program, to reach out and find those kind of people that you can bring into your life. We also, football or athletics. Athletics is, obviously very competitive, but it's a value-driven sport. And by that I mean there are those values, same values that you teach your children, that are ingrained in athletics, and I think particularly in the sport of football, if indeed they're promoted. And, we have those, you've probably read, many of you, those of you, from Kansas here have read about those 16 Wildcat goals for success. You can go online and find them. They're on walls every place around the state and online, et cetera, et cetera. And people from corporate America that are Kansas State people, and those that are not, contact me from time to time and tell me, in our boardroom we have those 16 Wildcat goals for success, et cetera. But when you look at them, like I said, it's not rocket science, and it's not anything that you don't teach your children. But they are significant and they are important. And that's what we tried to promote with young people, knowing that if indeed you embrace a value system, that it will help you become successful, certainly on the football field, but it helps you become successful in all facets of your life. We always, football, sports, athletics, and your business as well, is kind of goal-oriented, kind of goal-driven, isn't it? I mean, you have certain goals that you want to achieve. Young people have certain goals that they desire to achieve. Athletic teams have certain goals they desire to achieve. This is what we want to accomplish, a goal. We spend a lot of time with that because I think most people think about, okay, here's something I want to accomplish. I want to do this with my profession. I want to do this financially, et cetera, this with my family, whatever the case may be. And we think, okay, here are our goals. And you think, okay, now I just need to work hard to achieve those goals. Well, that's a part of it. But it's not all of it. And I can remember when we would have those meetings, and I say those meetings, when I would meet with players in our program, and I did this every single day. And I would meet with them before they had their meetings with their position coaches about football, and before they went on the football field. I would meet with them, and we never talked about football. And I would go around, and I would ask each young guy, and it took a lot of time. I would say, what are your priorities in life? What are your priorities? What's really important to you? And eventually they thought, this guy, at first they thought, this will stop. He won't keep doing this. And so they appeased me. After a while, they realized, and I have a great deal of persistence, which is one of those values, and so I wouldn't stop. And I continued, to move in the same direction. Finally, they said, maybe we just better try to cooperate. And consequently, they did. So I would ask those questions, and I would share with them that priority that they have in their life can be and should be translated as a goal, something that they wanted to achieve. And so they would learn how to, here's my priority, here's the goal that I want to set in my life, and here's another goal, and here's another goal. And I would always say, they would give me a priority or a goal, and I would say, okay, how are you going to achieve it? And when we first started, the answer was the same all the way across the board. If there were 80 youngsters in there, and I asked every single one of them, they'd all say the same thing. What? Work hard, right? Work hard. Well, there's more to it than just working hard. And part of it is having a process. You know, working hard at what, in other words? It's true in your business. You can work extremely hard, and if you're doing the wrong thing, you got dead cattle on your hands. Okay? So it's a matter of having a process. And that was what was important for us to be able to establish with young people, how to establish a process, a method about how they can become better every day. And it just meant little goals or little objectives, so to speak. You know, and I would go through and I would say, okay, you know, give me one of your goals. Okay, I want to be a better son. All right, what can you do today to become a better son? Well, I can, what can I do? What can I do? Oh, I could call my mother and tell her I love her. Well, that makes you a better son. It truly does. Okay? And then what can you do tomorrow? And what can you do the next day? You know, and translate that into all priorities and goals that you have in your life. And then establish, you know, those objectives that you can reach that take you closer and closer and closer to achieving that goal. You know, we deal with young people. I've got 5 children, or we have 5 children. We've got 9 grandchildren, and we have 4 great-grandchildren. Just had 3 of them in 1 month, in fact. Well, you know, that's a lot of young people. But a lot of young people that live in a world that is far different than many of you and I have lived in all of our lives. And having a value system that is significant in our world is so important for our youth, for all of us, but certainly for our youth. You know, I can remember, you know, you can remember you remember Columbine, right? Okay, we all remember that. And yet, you know, for the most part, Colorado is kind of West Coast from, you know, the Midwest, right? I mean, just a little different environment. Okay? And we always thought, you know, that could never happen here. Could never happen here. And pretty soon after that, you know, then there was another incident that took place. This is whatever that is, 18, almost 20 years ago, happened up in Michigan. Then all of a sudden, the same thing happened down in Wichita, Kansas. Do you know, in the last 3 days, a student drew a gun on other students at Manhattan High School, did the same thing. Another student did the same thing in Junction City at the high school. It is here. It's happening. We read about incidents, whatever they happen to be, every single day, do we not? And all the killings, and all that's taking place. You know, and why does that happen? It happens, it's the problem, or the problem is initiated, created by people, young or otherwise, that do not have the kind of value system that you and I realize is appropriate in this day and age. Young people, you hear the talk about instant self-gratification. They say this group of young people, this generation of young people right now is embraced in exactly that. Instant self-gratification. I want it now. If I can't have it now, to heck with it, I'm going to move on to something else. Sad way to live a life. Sad way to live a life. But, you know, it doesn't have to be that way. Even with that type of mentality, you know, when a young person or anyone establishes that process, those steps that need to be taken in order to achieve a particular objective or a particular goal in your life, it's like that young guy. He could call his mother and he could say, I love you. And if he did that, he feels success, even though that's only a small part of getting where he desires to go or where you would like for him to go. But nevertheless, he felt the success of it, which allows him to come back for another day. And I think that is significant in this day and age. You know, as I said before, you know, we always taught young people about hard work, but having that process, then the hard work takes over. Then you step up, and are you willing to do it, day in and day out? Do you have the perseverance? Perseverance is a major trait for young people. You are the epitome of perseverance, epitome of hard work. You think about people that are on the farm. You think about people that raise cattle. You think about, you're up before the sun's up and you're in the fields when the sun goes down. That's hard work. And it's perseverance, is it not? I mean, you can't let it go for a day or 2 days or 3 days or whatever the case may be. You have to keep on keeping on, so to speak. And that's what young people today need to learn, understand, the value of perseverance. You might, in athletics, they say don't give up. We talk about perseverance or persistence, but whatever term you use, it becomes such a valuable tool for any individual in order to achieve the successes that they desire to achieve. And creating a priority system and a goal system is really establishing, what creates success in our lives, and then being able to have the system to follow up on and put the hard work along with it in order to achieve those successes. And and in this day and age, I don't know that this has always been true, but I think it probably has. Expectations. Every single one of us in this room, regardless of our age, all grew up with great expectations placed upon us by others. You place great expectation on other people as well, your children. I was brought up, you were brought up, go to school, be in class, be respectful of others, don't use alcohol, don't do this, etc. A lot of expectations placed upon us about how we conduct our lives. Young people today have to deal with those same expectations. But what becomes more significant, I think, is for young people to learn, for all of us to learn, that the important expectations are the ones that we place upon ourselves. And if I'm a young teenager, the higher degree of expectations that I can place upon myself, the better chance I have to achieve success. In other words, we place limitations on our abilities to achieve success. Young people place limitations on their abilities to achieve success. Too often we say, we would desire for you to achieve this, and so would you, and that young person can say, I don't think I can do that. That's too hard. I don't have the skill to do that. I don't have the ability to do that. Whatever the reasons are, that they place limitations on we place limitations on our abilities to achieve success. And it becomes significant in our lives to place great expectations on ourselves. Becomes significant. Now, I've taken a bunch of your time. I'll tell you a quick story that the pastor at my church told me, and then I guess I probably cut into your dinner hours when I'm thinking. I apologize for that. I go to the First Presbyterian Church here. Cam McConnell's the pastor, and he told this story one time about an author. And he lived in continental United States. He wanted to write a book on all of the great, magnificent cathedrals and churches all across our world. So he got on a plane, he flew to Europe, and he went all over Europe. England, Ireland, everywhere. And every place he would call ahead and make an appointment to go in and visit with the priest or pastor at a church about that particular church or cathedral. So the very first one that he goes into is in England, and the priest, they have a long conversation. The priest takes him into the chapel, and they're standing there talking, and this author looks on the wall, and there is a telephone, and it appears to be made of gold. It's a golden telephone. And beneath it, there's a sign, and the sign says $25,000 per call. And the author says to the priest, said, tell me about that. What's that all mean? And he said, well, the priest said, it's pretty simple. He said, you can get on that telephone, so you can call heaven, and you can speak person to person with your Lord. It costs you $25,000. I said, that's amazing. So he finished his interview there, went on to the next cathedral in Ireland, was in the church, and same thing happens. And so they're talking, and he looks on the wall, and there's same thing, golden telephone, $25,000 per call. And the author said, I just came from a cathedral, and I was told such and such. And he said, tell me what this means. And he said, well, you're right, it's the same thing. He said, you can get on that phone, you can call person to person for your Lord, it costs you $25,000. Guy thought it was amazing. Everywhere he went in Europe, he found the same thing. So he gets on a plane, crosses the continent, or crosses the ocean, comes back to the United States, works up and down the eastern seaboard, same thing takes place. Works his way across, he's in the Midwest, stops in Manhattan, Kansas. He goes to a church here in Manhattan, Kansas. I'm not going to tell you the name of the church. Goes in the chapel with the minister, looks on the wall. There's an old Manila telephone. You know what those look like, that go back 30, 40, 50 years ago. And it's got a sign underneath it, and it says 10 cents per call. And so the author tells the pastor about his trips to Europe and across the eastern seaboard and what he found with the golden telephone. He said, tell me about this. And the pastor says, well, it's pretty simple. He said, yes, you can get on that telephone and you can call person to heaven and speak person to person with your Lord. And it cost you 10 cents. And the author said, why only 10 cents? He said, well, that's pretty simple too. You're in Manhattan, Kansas, and that is a local call. Thank you all very much. Have a good meal.